A dark screen sets the mood, reminding everyone that no matter how important someone is, they all turn to ash eventually. The story starts off in a place called the Kingdom of Nirna, which is a rich country with plenty of resources tucked away in the northern part of the continent. The scene shifts to the royal castle at night, where all the lights are on because the graduation ceremony for the Royal Academy is finally happening. During the event, Prince Belvute speaks up and tells the whole crowd that he has something to say. Belvute stands tall on the stage and announces that from this moment on, he is officially calling off his engagement to a girl named Rorona Ryth, which leaves everyone watching completely shocked. Rorona stays perfectly calm and just asks if His Highness actually means what he's saying, and Belvute gets annoyed since she isn't even flinching. He tells her she's a woman with zero charm. Rolona's eyes stay completely calm even after the insult. People have started calling her the heartless amethyst because of how cold she seems. Suddenly, her younger sister Lumina jumps in. She cries out to Belvute, begging him not to say such mean things about her big sister. Lumina grips her dress and looks down, acting like she's just heartbroken over how sad the whole situation has become. Belvute looks at her with a soft smile and tells Lumina she's way too kind-hearted for her own good. But then he turns back to Rorona and starts laying into her. He accuses her of bullying Lumina just because Lumina's mother wasn't a noble. He keeps the insults coming, saying that even as a member of a count's family, she's been seen hanging out with commoners just to make money. He finishes his rant by shouting that there is absolutely no way a wicked woman like her could ever be fit to be the queen. Rorona doesn't even argue, she just says she understands and asks to be excused so she can leave the party. Belvute is totally stunned by her reaction. He was expecting a fight or some tears, but he got nothing at all, so he loses his cool and yells after her, demanding to know if she seriously has nothing to say to defend herself. Rorona keeps it short, telling him she doesn't care at all, and then adds that she's leaving all the paperwork for the breakup in his hands. She just turns around and walks out the massive doors while Belvute yells her name, trying to get a rise out of her. He stands there gritting his teeth, thinking about how cold she was and how she didn't show even a bit of heart right to the very end. Everyone at the party starts gossiping immediately. Some people are shocked she'd act like that, while others claim they knew something was off, so the nasty rumors about the girl who was supposed to be the queen start spreading like crazy and making everyone lose it. But that wasn't the end of it, because the very next day, a piece of news came out that was even more of a disaster. People are already excited to spread the word, with one guy saying he can't wait to tell everyone about the huge scandal. The news hits that the count's daughter, Rorona Luce, died in a sudden accident. She's just lying there still, eyes open and vacant while people place white flowers around her head. Belvute looks like he's seen a ghost. He can't even process it, asking if she's seriously gone. Belvute lets out a heavy breath while slumped over in his chair, looking completely drained while the staff watches him from behind. He starts thinking that if he was going to end up dead anyway, then he really just wishes that Rorona had died a lot sooner than she actually did. A voice calls him out, asking how he could even do such a thing, and it turns out the queen is lecturing him about the breakup, saying he should have used the right procedures instead of making a huge scene. The king backs her up, telling him that as the crown prince, he's got to take ownership of his words. Belvute puts a hand on his chest and says he understands, but as he turns to leave, he tells them he'll personally handle all the responsibility and the costs for canceling the engagement. He's actually convinced that what he did was a smart move that people should be praising, mostly because he's stuck on the idea that Rorona was never the right fit to be a queen anyway. The legal side of things is actually pretty specific because usually, a person is only excused from getting permission or paying a massive fee if things go a certain way, especially since engagements in the Nirna Kingdom are seen as serious legal contracts. Normally, if someone wanted to cancel the whole thing, they'd have to provide legal proof that both sides agree and pay a heavy fine. But there's a loophole, because it turns out that someone dying doesn't count as breaking the contract, so the paperwork for this specific annulment changes everything. All those formal documents and the official permission you'd usually need from the lords and the church just don't apply anymore. Belvute gets a dark look on his face and smirks, thinking to himself that this is honestly the best gift Rorona ever could have left him. He starts thinking back to when they were just kids, remembering how she was always around and followed him everywhere he went. It all started when the king sat on his throne and told Count Luce that he did an incredible job in battle, offering him gold, a castle, or even weapons as a reward. The king went even further than that, telling the kneeling count that he'd even take his daughter in as the future queen, and the count was totally floored, saying it was the highest honor he could ever imagine for his family. The whole engagement started way back when Belvute was only 4 and Rorona was just 3 years old. He even remembers giving her flowers when they were little kids, and they basically grew up side by side, going from dancing at formal parties to long hours studying together. Belvute looks back on it now and realizes it's been 14 years since the whole thing began. He grips his chest tight, feeling the weight of all that time passing. He knows there wasn't exactly any deep love or real affection between them, but the years they spent together were still very real. He starts wondering when exactly things changed, when that feeling of being partners turned into this deep resentment he has for her. The truth is, Rorona was just too good at everything she did. She was so perfect that it actually started to freak him out a little. No matter how much work he put in, she was always one step ahead of him, and it was just plain infuriating. Belvute thinks back to how he was always terrified by Rorona, how she looked so cold and divine, like she was way more grown-up than him. He clutches his head, admitting that he's just plain scared of even being around her. He starts spiraling, wondering if she's been secretly laughing at him this whole time because she thinks he's incompetent. But he stops himself and puts his hand down, deciding it doesn't matter anymore since he can finally get engaged to Lumina. Later on, at the Ryth estate, a maid rushes into the room to give Lumina the big news about what happened. Lumina looks completely shocked and asks if her sister is actually dead. She slowly brings her hands up to her face, acting like she's about to lose it. She covers her eyes and starts shaking, making it look like she's crying her heart out over the news. The maid looks down at her, calling it a total tragedy that her sister is gone. But behind her hands, Lumina is actually grinning like a psycho. She's thrilled that her pesky older sister is finally out of the way. Lumina looks like she's totally losing it, clutching her face with a crazy look in her eyes while thinking about how everything is finally hers. Keeping the act going in front of the maid, she buries her face in her hands and asks what could have possibly happened. The maid explains that the carriage was in a horrible accident, describing the whole thing as a total disaster. She goes on to say that Rorona's face was so badly damaged they couldn't even recognize her, and she's too shaken to say another word. Lumina just tells her she understands and asks to be left alone for a while, acting like she's too heartbroken to talk. Once the room is empty, she just sits there in the silence, still pretending to cry just in case someone is watching. But then a creepy smirk crawls across her face as she starts laughing quietly to herself. She starts cheering and hugging a pillow, celebrating the fact that she actually pulled it off and can't believe how lucky she got. Rolling around on the bed, she brags about how Prince Belvute and the entire family estate are finally hers for the taking. And staring up at the ceiling, she tells herself that from now on, absolutely no one is ever going to look down on her or her mother again. Lumina starts thinking about her mother, Belbarassa, who is the current Lady Luce and was famous for her beauty despite being born a commoner. There's a weird buzzing sound in her head as she remembers how her mother's grandfather was actually the secret kid of a noble. And back then, people would look at Belbarassa and say how beautiful she was, claiming her looks were a gift from that noble blood. Her mother worked hard, getting the best education possible from her grandfather and spending all her time at noble estates, just to make sure she learned exactly how to act like one of them. All that effort eventually paid off when she caught the attention of Count Luce after he lost his first wife, leading to Lumina always seeing her mother's rise to the top as her biggest source of pride. But things weren't always perfect. She remembers hearing people talk trash behind their backs, calling her mother a disgusting social climber who must have used dirty tricks. The nobles would whisper that she's just a commoner at the end of the day and that everyone would see her true colors eventually. And hearing those insults used to drive Lumina crazy because of how frustrating it was to be looked down on like that. Young Lumina sits on the floor and asks her mother if her father isn't coming home again today. Belbarassa just looks at her and says the guy is always busy, so Lumina starts thinking that her father probably doesn't even realize how much her mother is suffering, which makes her feel like she needs to step up. She walks off, telling herself that the last thing she wants is to become another burden for her mother to carry. She puts in all this work and studies constantly, but she can't help noticing how much attention her father gives Rorona and realizes that no matter how hard she tries, it never feels like enough. Looking at how perfect her sister is, she feels like she's just no match for Rorona in anything they do. It's like people expect her to lose since there's a 2-year age gap between them. And they tell her she's doing a good job considering her opponent is the great Lady Rorona. But that kind of praise just makes her bite her finger in frustration. She's got this look in her eyes like she's hit her limit, especially because something huge just went down at the estate. Someone inside is losing their mind, and Lumina is standing there in total shock, asking if it's true that her older sister Rorona is actually going to be the next head of the family. Rorona starts explaining an old law that allows a firstborn child to hold 2 noble titles at the same time, as long as they marry into another house. Lumina is completely blindsided by this, shaking while she says she's never heard anything like that before. Rorona stays calm and says even after she marries Lord Belvute, she's keeping the crest of the House of Ruse, because she plans on having her own kid inherit the title of Count one day. Lumina can't even hide her shock, and someone starts yelling about how this is all happening despite the fact that Lumina is right there. Lumina sits by herself, trying to catch her breath after the intense memory. She gets this creepy look in her eyes and says it's too bad for her sister, but it's actually great for her that Rorona is dead. She flips the switch back to her sweet act and starts cheering, telling everyone to hurry up so they can go see Lord Belvute. Meanwhile, Belvute is alone in his room, just staring at some papers like he's totally exhausted. The family trustee, Shezem Berman, looks at the letter and completely loses it, asking if Rorona has actually passed away. He just collapses right there on the floor and holds his head, saying over and over that everything is finished. Looking through the paperwork, there's a massive stack of IOUs that all have Rorona's name signed at the bottom. Shezem grips the papers so hard they start to wrinkle. He knows he's got to go tell Count Lus what's happening. He grabs his bag and moves fast, heading straight for the main estate to deliver the news. Even though they live in this huge mansion, turns out the entire Lus family is actually drowning in debt. The Count was always obsessed with military stuff and never came home, always saying he was busy with training. Back during the war, he was constantly getting rewards and bonuses for doing such a good job on the field. The irony is that his success ended up bringing peace to the country, which meant no more war money coming in. Still, money shouldn't have been an issue. The family had piles of gold and treasure just sitting around. Rorona stands there quietly, a reminder that the family used to be set with huge rewards from the Count's work, not to mention the crazy high status they got from her being the future crown princess. Shezem Berman rushes off, thinking to himself that the rest of the family doesn't have a clue. He's sweating and looks completely stressed out because nobody understands how bad things actually are. Looking back to 6 years ago, the problems were already starting to pile up. Shezem sat on a bench with his head in his hands, wondering what to do since they'd already spent the servants' wages. He's been trying his best to keep things afloat for 2 years, while the parents lived like there was no tomorrow. The Count just kept pouring every cent they had into his weird military hobbies and war games, while the Countess acted like she had a blank check, spending money on whatever she wanted without a care. Shezem stares off, knowing that when it all finally crashes down, he's the one who's going to take the fall. Shezem is sitting alone on a bench when he hears something nearby. He looks up and asks if someone is there as Rorona steps out from the trees, looking concerned. She recognizes him and asks if he's feeling all right since he looks pretty rough. Shezem is totally shocked to see her and can barely get her name out because he's only ever seen her from a distance a few times. She's usually just a figure walking through the halls, but he knows her reputation as someone who doesn't waste the family's money or treat the help like dirt, making him feel overwhelmed. He can't believe a person like her is actually worried about him, and it hits him so hard that he just breaks down. He starts crying right there, calling out to her as all the stress finally catches up to him. After they sit together for a bit, Shezem explains the mess. He says he understands the situation, while Rorona tells him she's sorry, showing him some real kindness. She looks at him with a serious face and puts her hand on his shoulder, then asks if he has a moment to spare. Shezem wipes away his tears and immediately says yes, ready to listen to whatever she needs. Shezem thinks back on the very next day, a day he says he'll never forget because he's sitting at his desk when Rorona knocks, asking if he has a moment. He's caught off guard but tells her yes. The two of them sit down together to talk about the family's situation. Rorona places a pouch of gold coins on the table, telling him to use it to pay the servants' wages, so Shezem completely loses it. He starts sweating, stuttering that he can't take it and asking where the money even came from. She looks him right in the eye and calmly explains that she sold off her jewelry and accessories, which really hits him. She tells Shezem that she's not going to let him carry this entire weight by himself anymore and promises that she's going to do everything she can to help him out. From that point on, Rorona starts working directly with commoner merchants to make her own money, eventually getting to a point where she's contributing a steady amount to the family's estate every single month. Shezem's memory keeps going. He remembers that when the family had to fire their servants, Rorona went out of her way to find every single one of them a new job so they wouldn't be left with nothing. And even when the family was forced to borrow more money, she used her own business ties to set up deals with really good terms. But the only reason those deals even went through was because the merchants trusted Rorona's word and her reputation back in the present. Shezem stares at his hands and starts shaking, whispering Rorona's name as he starts to spiral, thinking about how much everything hurts and how he's honestly terrified of what's going to happen to them now. He thinks back to when she sat with him on a bench and tried to comfort him, realizing her kindness is the only thing that's been holding him together. And without her around, he won't know what to do at all. He just sits there with his face in his hands, completely broken by the thought of her actually being gone. A lone carriage travels down a bumpy dirt road through the middle of the forest. At the royal palace, Lumina rushes in looking totally panicked and reaches out to Prince Belvute. She tells him something's going on with her sister, and the staff nearby look just as stressed, with one maid looking like she's about to cry. Belvute looks at Lumina and says he was actually shocked when he heard the news, but he asks her what exactly happened. Lumina tells him that even she doesn't know the full story yet, because apparently her sister just disappeared somewhere right after leaving the ceremony, and the real problem is that she didn't even come home last night. Belvute gets this serious look on his face and says he hasn't seen any reports about her being missing, and he points out that a situation like this usually means they need to file an official search request with the House of Lords. Lumina explains that after the huge scene at the party, they just assumed her sister was out somewhere trying to distract herself, especially since their father was away too. Belvute just listens as the weight of the situation starts to sink in. Standing by a parked carriage, Belvute asks if anyone actually knows where Rorona was headed, but Lumina tells him they don't have a clue, though some witnesses did spot her sister's carriage. Apparently, people saw the carriage speeding toward the edge of town right after the ceremony ended. Lumina looks pretty upset and wonders if the shock of the breakup was just too much, making Rorona drive off without a plan. Belvute looks her right in the eye with a serious expression and asks if that's really what happened, because he wants to know if it's true that the news of an accident only came out this morning. Lumina confirms it, explaining that guards found their family's horse wandering alone on the outskirts of the capital, which makes Belvute ask if it really was just the horse. She says the whole thing felt suspicious to her, so she started looking into the path the carriage took, and eventually, they found the carriage flipped over on the side of the road with blood nearby. Lumina completely loses it and starts crying, looking totally devastated by what they found. Belvute pulls Lumina into a tight hug and yells out her name as she breaks down, while she just leans into him, crying and quietly saying his name. It's crazy because even when her engagement was suddenly called off like that, Rorona never lost her cool or looked upset for even a second. She just stayed perfectly composed and beautiful through the whole mess. But despite how strong she acted, the narration makes it clear that Rorona is gone now. Lumina starts asking if this whole situation was actually just an accident, because she heard the carriage flipped over when the horses swerved to avoid hitting something. The driver managed to survive the crash, but her sister ended up getting crushed. The carriage frame just came down on her, and Lumina can't even handle the thought of it. Belvute just holds Lumina close, trying to comfort her while she breaks down. She looks up at him and asks what's supposed to happen now that everything's changed. Belvute explains that for the time being, they have to go through a mourning period. Plus, there's still a whole lot of stuff to investigate and official procedures to wrap up. He tells her straight up that it's probably best if they don't see each other for a while, which clearly hits Lumina hard as she just stares back at him in total shock. Belvute doesn't budge, keeping a serious look on his face while he repeats that there's really nothing they can do about the situation right now. He grabs her hands and says he's sending guards with her, so she better be home by sunset, promising to get a messenger sent over to her place as early as tomorrow. Lumina looks down, looking pretty shaken up as she tells the prince she understands and will do what he says. So the prince stands by the window while some loud crashing sounds ring out through the empty room, and he just clenches his fists tight, clearly trying to hold back whatever he's feeling right now. But he tells himself that everything is fine and there shouldn't be any problems with the way things are going. Moving on, we see Heels standing among broken shards as the thought of everyone involved crosses her mind, leading to all these memories of Shezem. The prince, Lumina, and her parents flashing through the broken glass like Rorona is standing there asking them if they're actually happy now that she's gone for good. The prince stays sitting by the window in the dark, just staring out at nothing while he lets out this long, heavy sigh because of the stress of everything that just went down. And the reality finally sets in that Rorona really isn't part of this world anymore. Rorona lies back with her eyes closed, holding a letter tight against her chest as she thinks about the mountain of work she's got ahead of her. Prince Belvute looks off with a cold stare. He's convinced everything he's doing is for the sake of a bright future with Lumina, but the story shifts back to several years ago when a much younger Lumina was running around with a huge smile, calling out for her big sister. Rorona is standing there in a fancy ball gown, looking down at her little sister and telling her she isn't even supposed to be here yet. Lumina just pouts, looking all annoyed as she tells her sister she only came because she wanted to celebrate her big debutante ball, and Rorona lets out a sigh, calling her a handful before turning to introduce her little sister to Lord Belvute for the very first time. Lumina puts on her best smile and blushes, telling the prince it's a total pleasure to meet him while introducing herself as Lumina Ryth. Belvute just stands there looking at her. It's the moment they first met, and he's clearly paying attention to the kid. Back then, it felt like they were from another world. If Rorona was seen as this perfect, distant goddess, then everyone thought Lumina was more like a sweet little angel, standing right there by her sister's side. Lumina calls out to Lord Belvute as they arrive, and Rorona tries to keep things formal by addressing him too, but Belvute is pretty caught off guard, asking if Lumina really came along with them. Rorona immediately apologizes for the surprise, explaining that her little sister basically forced her way onto the trip. She turns to the kid and tells her she isn't supposed to be here, ordering her to go back home to the manor right now. Lumina starts pouting, telling Rorona she's being mean and begging her not to leave her out of the fun. Belvute just smiles at the scene, telling them it's no big deal and that Lumina is welcome to join them from here on out. Things were actually going really well for the three of them, at least until the moment everything took a turn. Later on, Belvute is walking through the snowy woods when he spots Lumina sitting all alone on the ground. He looks totally shocked to see her out there, asking what she's even doing in a place like this, especially since she looks like she's freezing, so he tells her she needs to get back inside the house as fast as possible. Lumina looks down at the snow, acting all sad while telling Belvute that she just can't do things as well as her sister can, and she follows that up by saying she's pretty sure she's going to get in trouble the second she gets back home. Belvute kneels down to wrap his coat around her, asking who could even think about yelling at a girl as cute as her, but Lumina just starts shaking under the coat, looking like she's about to reveal something really dark. He looks down and sees these long, nasty scars covering her skin. Belvute looks totally sick to his stomach, asking if those marks are actually from a whip. Lumina tells him that when they're alone, Rorona treats her like this just because she's the daughter of the second wife and a total good-for-nothing. His eyes go wide as it starts to sink in that the girl he knows as Rorona could actually be capable of something so messed up. Lumina starts crying and panicking, begging him at the top of her lungs not to tell a single soul about any of this. Belvute stands there looking completely shaken. He just can't wrap his head around what he's hearing right now. Belvute remembers the time he accidentally walked in on Rorona supposedly laying into Lumina, and the look on her face back then was enough to make anyone second guess who she really was. He stepped in right then, yelling for Rorona to cut it out while Lumina just cried out his name. Rorona just stood there looking stunned, not even trying to defend herself as she let out a quiet gasp. So right in that moment, all the bad things Belvute suspected about her finally felt like the truth. He used to think she was basically a goddess who could do no wrong, but seeing her stand there like a bully who would actually hurt her own sister changed everything for him. The memory feels dark and messy, just like the image he now has of her in his head, making him realize that he has to be the one to step up and protect Lumina from her. Back at the Academy Clock Tower, the sun hangs over the campus as things finally start moving. Lumina is glowing with excitement, cheering that she and Belvute can finally be together at the Academy, and Belvute smiles back, congratulating her on starting school and offering to show her around the campus right away. She looks up at him all grateful and thanks him for the help, the two of them looking like a perfect pair until Belvute catches the sound of some girls whispering nearby. And even though he's acting cool, he can't ignore the students behind him talking about the latest exam results from right after the break. He hears them going on about how Rorona took the top spot in the class again, which everyone seems to think is just standard for someone in her position. It's the same old story for him, and every time he's out in public like this, he's stuck listening to people say that compared to her, he's basically just a mediocre prince. It's a constant reminder of how much people fear and respect Rorona's skills, making him feel even smaller, especially since the gossip doesn't stop, with students saying she's the one who actually acts like royalty and that he's lucky they aren't even in the same grade. Belvute's mind is a total mess, getting eaten up by paranoia and weird theories until Lumina calls out to him with a huge smile, telling him it's time for them to head out. He looks at her and can't help but wish she was his actual fiancée instead of Rorona, but the story skips ahead a few days at the royal castle, where Belvute is stuck at his desk. He's complaining about how much paperwork he still has to finish when he finds a weird letter in the pile that doesn't even have a sender's name on it. The letter is a total bombshell, claiming that Rorona has been sneaking around frequenting the slums to handle some really shady business on the side, and that the entire Luss family is secretly buying up illegal weapons and banned goods. Belvute stares at the tip, trying to tell himself it's just someone trying to start drama, but he can't stop looking at it. Belvute can't handle the stress of the letter alone, so he shouts out to see if anyone is nearby. One of his people rushes in to ask what's wrong, and the prince immediately orders them to dig into everything the letter says. The investigation starts right away, focusing entirely on Rorona Luce and her recent movements, showing that she's been secretly meeting with commoner merchants at the Maishi company to handle business deals. There's even a paper trail to back it up. The report points out several invoice copies as proof, but the dirt doesn't stop with her, because the investigators also find info on Count Luce buying up weapons while his wife, Berbereza, has apparently been out getting her hands on all kinds of illegal contraband. Belvute sits alone in his office late at night, slumped over his desk while the weight of it all hits him. He eventually snaps and yells about how stupid this all is, he just can't believe it. To him, the biggest issue is that an unmarried noble girl would even think about hanging out in the same places as commoner guys. Belvute goes over the report again, seeing her father as just a count playing at war, and her mother as a greedy countess who spends her time buying up illegal contraband. He starts spiraling, thinking about how if he had actually married Rorona without knowing any of this, the entire royal family would have been stuck facing a massive humiliation because of her family's mess. He realizes he can use these secrets to his advantage, wondering if this is the key to finally annulling his engagement. And if he uses the royal family's influence to cover up what the Count and his wife have been doing, he could just ditch Rorona and set up a new engagement with Lumina instead. He decides that this is the move, all just to break down Rorona's perfect reputation. So he finally exposed her family's dirty secrets and called off the engagement for good. It all goes down right in the middle of the graduation ceremony. Belvute stands there facing Rorona, who doesn't even flinch. She just looks him right in the eye and says she understands, showing zero resistance. Instead of putting up a fight or arguing against the engagement being called off, she just lets it happen. Belvute sits back later thinking that with Rorona out of the picture, he's finally free of his problems and can actually have a future with Lumina, or at least, that's what he tries to tell himself. But he's sitting at his desk feeling completely off. He can't shake this weird feeling of discomfort, and meanwhile a carriage is rolling through the city streets. Inside, Lumina is already complaining. She calls Belvute out for being way too cold to her, asking why he can't just be a little more excited to be hanging out with her. She stares out the window with this look in her eyes, thinking that her time has finally come and she's definitely going to get her happy ending. Lumina is pretty annoyed, calling out to her big sister and asking if she's really heading back to the castle yet again. Rorona doesn't really answer though, just looks back with this serious look on her face. She bends down to Lumina's level and reminds her that she isn't going there to mess around or play. It's all about studying and learning what it takes to actually be a queen, and later on, she's waiting by the door as a carriage pulls up to the front of the house. Belvute shows up looking like a total natural in his uniform, standing there in front of some flowers as he tells Rorona that he's finally come to get her. She's actually a little dazzled by it, thinking he looks exactly like a prince out of a storybook, so he reaches out and takes her hand in his. He even goes as far as dropping to one knee to kiss her hand right there. But Rorona doesn't really react at all, just staring at him in silence until he starts to get completely flustered and breaks character. He tries to recover with a nervous laugh, standing there feeling a little embarrassed about the whole thing. Lumina watches from the doorway, thinking if it were her, she'd never make the prince look so uncomfortable later on. She's losing it in her mother's lap, crying about how she's the one who should have been his fiancé. Belbarassa just holds her close, feeling completely terrible for her daughter, while she flashes back to when Lumina was just a baby, apologizing and wishing she'd given birth to her sooner. Because when the engagement offer originally showed up, Lumina wasn't even old enough to be baptized yet. Since she was so young, she wasn't even on the books as an official noble, so her mom tells her not to worry, since Rorona will probably just let her inherit the house as a backup anyway. Lumina doesn't care about the money or the house though. All she can think about is having the prince for herself and being the one in that wedding dress. Since she wasn't going to get the house either way, she decides it's time to finally take action. Lumina keeps telling herself that Rorona doesn't actually love Prince Belvute, and since the prince is so confused by Rorona's cold attitude, Lumina thinks she sees an opening, which is why she decides it's finally time to make her move and declares to herself that she isn't going to keep her feelings for him a secret anymore. Later on, Lumina is in her room when something outside catches her eye. The wind blows through the window during this weirdly tense moment. She starts daydreaming about Belvute calling her name with that soft look on his face, making her heart race until a sudden jolt inside her carriage snaps her back to reality. She yells out to ask what the big idea is, but the driver just apologizes and says a dog ran out in front of them, though Lumina doesn't care and tells him to be more careful. Lumina stands by the window staring out at the massive building nearby, and she can't stop thinking about how her sister's body is still just sitting there, realizing she's going to have to go and get her back at some point. But mostly she's just confused why the people in charge haven't found a cause for the accident yet. The scene shifts quickly with a sudden, sharp motion, as Lumina clutches the curtains, telling herself her sister is dead and asking if that's not enough. Meanwhile, over at the Roos family villa, the guards are out in the courtyard going through their usual combat training when the news finally reaches Count Roos, who asks if Rorona is actually dead. He looks completely caught off guard and demands to know what the hell is going on. Count Roos loses his temper, yelling that it's all nonsense and asking the messenger if he wants to get killed right where he stands, but the guy is terrified, shaking as he insists it's the truth and holds out the official death certificate. Roos reaches out and rips the paper from the guy's hands, taking a second to actually look at the handwriting on the document. He stares at the words as the weight of it all finally hits him. The guy just breaks down, falling to his knees and screaming Rorona's name over and over, thinking about how beautiful his daughter was and how she'd already managed to survive so much in the past. His world feels like it's completely shattering, lighting into a memory of better days when he was a war hero, with everyone cheering that the Empire was safe as long as he was around. And he remembers coming back to his wife waiting at the stairs, holding their baby and welcoming him home. He looks back at how the happy life they had, his wife, his baby girl, and himself, ended way too fast. The memory turns dark, showing the little girl watching as blood drips down right in front of her, and Luce is right there, holding his wife's body and screaming because he's lost her for good. Word got around that bandits from the war broke into his place and killed his wife, even though Rorona had just been born, making everyone feel bad for the guy. But he couldn't stand it, asking himself if he was really just some pitiful guy to them, while people kept gossiping about how he'd been struggling ever since his wife passed away. He was constantly losing his temper and wrecking rooms, leading people to think he'd never find any real peace again. Instead of holding him accountable, everyone just felt sorry for him, spoiling him and treating him like he was fragile. Back in the present, he's totally falling apart on the floor, clutching his face and just yelling Rorona's name over and over, completely destroyed by the news. Luce is spiraling, thinking about how he just wants things to go back to how they were, wanting to be pampered once again, and he starts yelling for everyone to take pity on him. People in the crowd watch him break down, talking about how tragic this is. For the count, one guy even starts wiping away tears because the sight is so sad, while Luce is secretly thinking about how he's finally going to get spoiled again. Someone else is standing nearby, just watching the boots on the floor as the guy sees the whole mess. He spots the crowd surrounding the count on his knees and just lets out a quiet sigh, looking at the scene with a serious face and saying that this whole situation is honestly just awful. The truth is, Luce was only ever happy as long as there was a war going on, because that was enough for him. Back then, everyone was cheering his name and holding up banners for his glory while he rode through on his horse, and he was getting all the fame and money he could ever want. But all those rewards and the respect he had were strictly because of the war and nothing else. Luce comes home from the war and his wife, holding their baby by the stairs, welcomes him back. She can see the look on his face and asks if something good happened. Luce is pumped, yelling about how the rewards he got for his service this time are absolutely insane. He's riding high, especially because his favorite daughter Rorona just got engaged to the crown prince. To him, this feels like the absolute peak of his life, and he thinks things can't get any better. With all that money and fame, he decided to build something big, a massive place just for himself, like his own personal castle where he could be the man. After his first wife passed away, he eventually brought in a second wife to fill the void. But once the war ended and peace arrived, Luce felt like his purpose in life just disappeared. It didn't help that his new wife, Belvute, showed her true colors immediately, because the moment they tied the knot, she started wasting all his cash and turned into a massive headache. Luce thinks back to his time in the service, noting how long it's been since the big military drills wrapped up, and he mentions how you never really know when the next war might suddenly break out. People are hyped, cheering for the Count to live a long life while he tells them all to keep training together until that day comes. The crowd keeps it going, yelling about giving glory to Count Luce, but even with all that praise and respect, he feels like something is missing and his heart stays unfulfilled. Moving on, Lumina is off on her own, thinking about how things would change if her sister Rorona were to actually die. She's got it all figured out, knowing that everyone would go right back to feeling sorry for her, and once they pity her, she knows they're going to spoil her absolutely rotten. The scene shifts to Luce completely losing it, sobbing into his hands and screaming Rorona's name as he asks why this had to happen, leaving everyone nearby watching in shock, whispering about how tragic this whole thing is for the Count. Kaiser walks up to the grieving Count and tells him he doesn't even have the words to offer his condolences, catching Luce off guard as he looks up and asks if he's Kaiser. The young guy just stands there politely, putting a hand to his chest and saying it's a real honor that the Count even remembers a newcomer's name. He looks down with a soft smile, mentioning how Rorona was such an amazing noblewoman, and Luce is instantly surprised, asking if Kaiser actually knew her. Kaiser explains that they met just one time when he said hello to her at an evening party, telling him that once she heard he was one of the Count's students, she was incredibly kind to him. Luce just stares at the ground, processing the story and quietly saying, "Is that so?" while Kaiser waits. Kaiser offers to walk him back to the mansion if he's ready to head home, so Luce repeats the words back to himself, starting to realize it's finally time to go back to the manor. Kaiser looks off to the side, casually suggesting that they should probably just focus on getting Lady Rorona's memorial ready. Luce completely loses his cool, yelling about how he's the one stuck arranging the funeral and dealing with a massive pile of paperwork. He stands there shaking with his teeth gritted, looking like he's about to snap from the stress. He eventually just walks away, telling himself that if this whole mess was going to happen anyway, he really wishes she'd at least died after she became the crown princess instead. Luce figures that way the royal family would have been the ones forced to handle the funeral, and it would have made way more people feel sorry for her. Kaiser watches him go while leaning against the wall, acting all sad and saying it's a shame for Rorona to pass away so suddenly right after the crown prince went and broke off their engagement. Luce freezes up, looking totally shocked as he turns back to ask Kaiser what he just said. Luce is losing his mind, shouting about the broken engagement and demanding to know what's going on, while Kaiser just asks if he really had no idea. Kaiser starts filling him in, explaining that the whole thing went down just yesterday during the graduation ceremony at the Royal Academy. He suddenly remembers that a letter actually came in from Rorona herself, where she was asking to come along with them on their trip. But then he gets back to the drama at the ceremony, telling Luce about how everything shifted during the event. He describes how Prince Belvute stood in front of everyone and told Rorona that their engagement was officially cancelled, which just makes Luce even more stressed, as he rubs his head and mutters about how the whole story sounds completely ridiculous. Kaiser admits he doesn't know every single detail, but the word going around is that Rorona was caught bullying her younger sister, Lumina, and that's supposedly why she was called out in front of everyone at the venue. Luce stands there with his back turned, clutching a paper so hard it crumbles as he tells himself this has to be impossible, since he always saw Rorona as a pure, obedient kid, and now he's wondering if she's been playing him for a fool all along. Luce clenches the paper in his fist, muttering that if Rorona really turned into such a wicked person, then nobody would even care that she's gone. But then he just snaps and yells that he's going back to the manor right now, catching Kaiser totally off guard. Before he can even move, a servant rushes in and shouts that a messenger from the manor just arrived, and the guy quickly adds that the news he's bringing is specifically about Rorona. Everyone moves to a private room to talk, with Luce and Kaiser sitting down to hear the full story from the visitor, who turns out to be Shazamrius, the estate manager, and he starts off by saying it's been a long time since they last saw each other. Shazam tries to bring up the news of Rorona's passing, but Luce shuts him down immediately, shouting that he's already well aware of what happened. Luce breaks down and buries his face in his hands, crying about how his daughter is dead and he has no clue what to do anymore, but Shazam just looks at him with this cold, dark stare, and says if Rorona actually meant anything to him, then he wants to know why Luce just sat back and let things get this bad in the first place. Shazam keeps going, telling Luce that the real reason he's here today is to go over the current financial disaster of the estate. Luce looks like he's about to have a breakdown, asking what he means by finances, but Shazam just says yes and starts digging through his bag for some papers. He pulls out an IOU and explains that the cash flow for the whole place has been terrible for years now, leaving Luce standing there looking completely pale and shocked. Luce slams his hands onto the table and yells, asking what happened to all that reward money he earned back in the war, but Shazam just stays calm and tells him they actually hit rock bottom a long time ago. Luce starts losing it, shouting that it's impossible, so Shazam reminds him that he's already sent multiple letters explaining all of this. He finishes by saying that the war money, which should have lasted for generations, is completely tapped out, and there's basically no money coming in from the land anymore. Shazam continues his breakdown, explaining that even the basic maintenance costs for this detached estate barely get by on the small amount of money they get every year from the royal family. On top of that, there's the massive cost of buying and fixing up weapons, tools, and all the land. But most importantly, they have to pay for food, clothes, and housing for everyone gathered at the manor. Basically all the people who don't have jobs anymore now that the war is over. They're all just living there and slowly eating away at the count's fortune until there's nothing left. Luce is in total denial, saying it's completely absurd to think things are that bad, but Shazam points out that Belbarassa is a huge part of the problem, buying new jewelry and expensive dresses almost every single day. He drops the biggest news yet, telling Luce that until now, Rorona was the only one actually finding ways to raise the money, and she was even the one who personally went out and arranged for all these loans to keep the family afloat. Luce is sweating and looks completely blown away by the news. He can't believe it and shouts out, asking if Rorona was really the one doing all that work. Kaiser looks pretty down as he joins in, mentioning how he sent so many letters begging for help but never got any, and Shazam keeps the bad news coming. He explains that since Rorona left, it's impossible to get more loans, and their current income isn't even close to covering the debt payments. He tells the Count to stay calm though, saying there's still a way out as he reveals that Rorona was way ahead of them. She had already tracked down buyers for all the family assets, including the villa they're in right now, because she knew she was eventually going to leave. Shazam looks out at the grounds and points out that if the Count just lets go of this place right away, at the very least, They could finally settle every single debt they've piled up. Kaiser looks back on everything, noting how he knows the Count really treasures the time he spent at that villa, but Rorona is just worried. She says that being unable to move on from the war is only going to cause more conflict down the road. A clenched fist shows someone's frustration boiling over. Kaiser looks pretty shaken up as he talks about Rorona's wish, admitting he might not be strong enough, but he really wants to make it come true. Just as he's talking, Count Luce loses it and screams that he won't allow any of this to happen. The Count swings his arm in a blind rage, making Kaiser jump back. Kaiser is just standing there looking completely stressed out by the outburst. Luce glares with pure rage, telling Kaiser he's just talking trash to try and trick him. He screams at Kaiser, asking what kind of fun he gets out of stealing his home and his legacy. Luce curses Rorona, yelling about how she saw the breakup coming from a mile away, and ends his rant by saying she totally played him for a fool. Luce grabs Kaiser by the collar, but Kaiser tries to stand his ground, saying Rorona would never do what the Count is suggesting. Luce isn't buying it and accuses Kaiser of being a liar too, screaming that he's just pretending the family's money is all gone. The Count throws Kaiser to the floor. He hits the ground hard, let out a pained groan as he lands. An older woman nearby tries to step in and help, begging the Count to listen because what Kaiser said is the truth, but Luce has heard enough and tells them to shut up before looking at Kaiser and telling him he's officially fired. Kaiser tries to stop him, calling out for the Count to just wait a second, but the guards move in instantly, crossing their spears right in front of him to keep him down on the floor. Luce walks away as papers fly, leaving the kid behind. Kaiser starts to lose it and begins to cry, feeling like a total failure, wondering if he really can't even pull off one of Rorona's last wishes. A little later, Kaiser is outside the building leaning against a wall, just trying to catch his breath while holding onto his bag. Kaiser sits slumped against the wall, clutching his bag and groaning. He's completely drained after everything that just happened. Just then, a hand reaches out toward him as a calm voice asks the kid if he's doing all right. A well-dressed guy introduces himself as Kaiser Bart, offering his hand and asking if the kid can stand up. Kaiser looks up, totally caught off guard, but he manages to thank the stranger while pulling himself together. The dark-haired man asks if he works for the Count's family, and Kaiser admits he did, but mentions he actually just got fired. The man stays quiet for a second, just taking in the news, before saying he sees what's going on, noting that things look even worse than he thought they were. Kaiser just stares back, feeling pretty confused, wondering what this guy is really after. The stranger asks if he'd be up for a quick chat, keeping things polite and friendly, and then adds that he's pretty sure this will turn out to be a good deal for both of them. The story moves over to the busy commercial district of the royal capital, where an older man wearing a monocle is busy reading through the latest news. He's looking at an extra edition about Prince Belvute's fiancée, Rorona Luce, and the headline states that she actually died out on the edge of the city. The article even wonders if it happened because she was so shocked about her engagement being cancelled. But seeing this just makes the guy start laughing like he's won the lottery. Zelio, the chairman of his own company, cheers because with her gone, he finally has total control of everything. Things go back a few years to when he worked at the Meishi Trading Company, and a customer there is checking out a really nice item, asking Zelio what the price tag is. Zelio tells him it'll be 620,000, which leaves the customer completely stunned. A man holding an expensive-looking jewel tries to sweet-talk someone into a long-term deal, but Zelio is stuck in the past, remembering how his business was barely scraping by and making almost no money. He's at the counter ready to tell a customer that they're done for the day when he sees something that completely stops him in his tracks. A young lady in a fancy dress standing in his doorway. It's Rorona, and she looks right at him, asking if he'd be interested in doing some business together. Zelio just stares at her, totally stunned by the offer while she reaches her hand out to him, and without even thinking about it, he finds himself reaching back and taking her hand to seal the deal. He couldn't really explain why he did it, other than his gut feeling telling him this was the right choice. Rorona doesn't waste any time and tells him they should get a formal contract started right away, but she has one condition. She wants 30% of all the profits as her fee for helping him out. Rorona adds one more rule, telling Zelio he needs to get her okay before he makes any big business moves, and Zelio agrees. But he's actually shocked that she's only asking for 30% of the cut. Rorona just stays calm and explains that since she's using his shop and his name, the split is fair, so Zelio starts following her instructions to the letter. And it doesn't take long before insane amounts of profit start rolling in, completely changing his life. Now Zelio is the chairman of a massive company, and people are constantly yelling for him at his new office. One of his workers runs up to him to ask about a spice deal from a few days ago, and Zelio tells them he's already looked at it, saying the flavor will definitely be a hit in the East, while more staff members crowd around for his help. Things are going so smoothly that Rorona doesn't even really have to step in and make the big calls anymore. But a new deal comes across the desk that's so massive it leaves everyone wondering what the catch is. Zelio explains that the deal is so huge it's exactly why he can't bring it to her, since Rorona is already swamped with work, leaving his staff member totally confused. The old rule about getting Rorona's permission for every big move had started to become a real hassle for the business, so Zelio remembers the specific details of their agreement and slides his desk drawer open to find it. He pulls the folder out and starts scanning the pages to find the exact wording he needs, and a little smirk grows on his face as he addresses Rorona under his breath. He's genuinely impressed by how she handled things, thinking about what a great person she is while he reads the clause stating that the whole contract becomes completely void the second either one of them dies. The sun shines over the city as a few birds fly past the office window. Zelio stares at a massive bag of coins sitting on his desk, admitting that the only real problem he has now is figuring out what to do with all that money. Rorona stands in the office and repeats back to him in disbelief, asking if he's actually talking about that much physical cash. Rorona looks over the records and makes it clear that she wants her share of the deal paid out in cash, so Zelio shows her a bag stuffed with gold coins, mentioning that the books already show this money was handed over to her. He stands there thinking to himself, trying to decide if he should actually report what's happening or just let it go, but then he thinks back to a few days ago when things were different. He was acting all humble and welcoming a visitor from the Stella Empire, telling him how honored he was to meet him. The visitor smiles and introduces himself as a merchant named Hangrieve, and he goes on to say he's heard that the Maishi Trading Company is basically the biggest thing in the Kingdom of Nurna right now. Hangrieve gets down to business and shows off the product he wants them to handle, calling it Senzu cloth. He explains that it's made from a really unique plant which makes the material fireproof, impossible to tear and super tough. Because it's so durable, it's not just for making shirts. It can be used for all sorts of stuff like sails and bedding, leaving Zelio staring at the roll of fabric with his jaw on the floor, completely blown away by the quality of what he's holding. Zelio is practically begging Rorona to take the deal, saying they need to jump on it, but she tells him flat out that she's against it. She's suspicious because the deal seems way too good to be true, so she tells him they need to actually check out this fabric before committing. Zelio starts getting desperate, looking her right in the eye and asking her to just trust his judgment this time around. He keeps pushing, telling her that they can't let a huge opportunity like this just slip away, and Rorona finally gives in. She tells him fine, but she's going to do things her way, leaving Zelio with a specific instruction. The first deal is only going to be for half of the amount they originally planned on. Suddenly, an employee bursts into the room yelling for the guildmaster, saying someone already wants to buy the cloth, which catches Zelio totally off guard. He gets all hyped up, thinking he's some kind of genius because his call on the product was apparently perfect. But he starts getting greedy, thinking about how much more money they would have made if Rorona hadn't cut the deal in half. He decides right then that he's keeping the extra cash. Just as he's sitting there thinking about the money, someone else yells for him, making him jump in his seat as things get complicated. Zelio gets word that a guy named Lord Aslan Layal is there to see him, and the news clearly catches him off guard. Aslan shows up wearing a mask over his eyes. He's got this calm smile like he knows exactly what's going on. He walks in and greets Zelio, saying it's been a long time since they last saw each other. Zelio welcomes him in right away. He tells Aslan he's actually really glad he decided to show up. Aslan plays it polite, apologizing for just barging into the office without having an appointment scheduled. But Zelio is internally sweating because Aslan is one of the very few people who knows Rorona is actually running the whole show. He starts waving his hands around, telling Aslan not to worry about it because he wouldn't dream of minding the surprise visit. The guy is definitely a mystery. He always keeps his face hidden behind that mask and uses the last name Rial, which turns out to be a total fake that doesn't even exist in the Nurna kingdom. Everything about him looks suspicious as hell, but somehow all his business dealings are always 100% legitimate and clean. Aslan is a top-tier client who always pays on time and even drops helpful tips now and then, so Zelio knows he can't let this guy slip away, especially now that Rorona isn't around to handle things. The two sit down, and Zelio asks Aslan what exactly brings him to the office today. Aslan leans forward and admits he decided to drop by because he heard a really weird rumor. Zelio gets a bit tense and asks what kind of strange rumor he's talking about. Aslan brings up how Rorona's engagement to the prince was suddenly cancelled, and then he mentions that crazy story about her dying in some kind of accident, which leaves a heavy silence in the room while Aslan just sits there calmly. Zelio plays it cool and says he's actually been looking into that whole mess himself. He tells Aslan he's just been trying to gather some facts through his usual connections. Zelio explains that the rumors are actually true and the young lady really did have her engagement broken off, and he goes on to describe the accident, saying they found her body inside a carriage that flipped over on some back road. He even mentions that she's currently resting at the church right now. Aslan takes a second to process this and says it sounds like it's definitely not a lie. Zelio just looks down and gives a quiet reply, looking pretty stressed out about the whole thing. Aslan then asks if this means he's going to be the one leading the company from here on out. Zelio snaps back to attention and says yes, promising to carry on his lady's work and make sure every single thing is run the way it should be. He actually bows down and asks Lord Aslan to please keep supporting him and the business just like before, so Aslan just looks at him through his mask and says he sees how it is. Aslan sits back and notes how the company hasn't missed a beat even with Rorona gone, which he finds pretty impressive, though he laughs and mentions that Zelio's acting surprisingly cold considering they lost the actual pillar of the whole business. Zelio starts to stumble over his words and tries to come up with an answer, but Aslan asks if it's a bit heartless to keep the truth about Rorona's business dealings from the Roos family. This makes Zelio think back to when he found out the Count was in financial trouble and begged Rorona to use his own share of the money to settle the debts right away. Rorona just looked at him and said she appreciated the offer, but she told him she'd handle her family's affairs herself and that he should just keep what he earned. Back in the present, Zelio looks completely drained as he quietly says her name, so Aslan finally puts it together that all the money is actually being sent to the Count's family. Aslan sits across from Zelio, staying quiet while the tension builds. Zelio asks if Aslan came all this way just because he's worried about how the company is doing. Aslan admits that was part of it, but then he says there's something else he's actually after. Zelio looks down at the desk, clearly thrown off by what's happening in front of him. Zelio can't even finish his sentence when he sees a bag full of massive, sparkling diamonds. Aslan gets straight to the point and says he wants to buy every bit of information Zelio has on Rorona. Zelio just stands there staring at the payment, looking like he's having a hard time processing the offer. He starts sweating, his mouth hanging open as he tries to figure out what to do next. After the meeting, Aslan heads back outside and walks over to his carriage waiting in the street. Once he's finally alone, he lets out a frustrated curse while stepping into the carriage. Aslan is losing it in the back of the carriage, clutching his head and complaining that his disguise is totally trashed now. He stares off to the side, figuring there's really no point in keeping the act up while he's sitting in front of Kaiser. The two sit across from each other in silence for a second, then Aslan decides to get down to business. He asks Kaiser what the Count has been doing, but Kaiser just puts his head in his hands and says there's nothing to talk about. Kaiser explains that the Count is just playing the part of a sad father, while really he's just feeling sorry for himself, and even when the servants tried to tell him how bad things have gotten for the family, he just cold-shouldered them. Kaiser says it's a total waste of all the effort Lady Rorona put in, and a fist clenches tight with anger, until Aslan finally snaps, cursing under his breath and slamming his fist against the carriage wall. The mask he was wearing just sits there on the floor, looking pretty beat up after the outburst. Kaiser picks it up and tells him he should be more careful because they aren't cheap, plus he still needs it to hide his face. Kaiser stares right at him and drops his real name, calling him Your Highness, Estelle. The mood in the carriage gets heavy as the prince's true identity hangs in the air. But Kaiser isn't done, holding out the mask and telling him it's 100% necessary to keep his face covered. Estelle reaches for it with a gloved hand, clearly annoyed and calling the whole thing a total nuisance. Kaiser reminds him that if anyone finds out he's a prince of the Stella Empire, assassins are going to be all over them, but Estelle just shuts him down, saying they don't have time for that talk right now. He leans back, clutching his head and wishing he wasn't born with such a specific look, especially since he thinks if he just looked like his mother, he'd be nowhere near this messy war for the throne. The problem is his black hair and red eyes. Having both of those features at the same time is the dead giveaway for the Stella Empire's royal family, making it impossible for him to just blend in. Even with all the different noble bloodlines mixing in from the vassal nations, those specific royal traits always seem to pop up in the emperor's direct family line. Looking back at his childhood, Estelle was just an energetic kid, yelling for Kaiser to come explore the backyard, but his guard wasn't having it, asking him not to make his job any harder than it already was. Estelle just laughed it off, telling him it was fine until the guard reminded him that he still had a mountain of homework waiting for him. Estelle acted like it was nothing, saying he already finished it because he wanted to be a good vassal for his brothers, since he felt like he had to do his job the right way once the future rolled around. The guard asked him if he really loved his brothers that much, and Estelle just gave a huge smile, saying of course he did. Back then, being the third prince born to a concubine meant life was easy and carefree, at least until the winter he turned 12, when everything for the royal family started to fall apart. A voice cries out about how terrible everything is, and the situation only gets worse from there. An older guy holds back a royal woman, telling her she needs to stay away because the risk of infection is too high. Estelle is completely losing it, crying and asking his brother why this had to happen as he watches the life fade away right in front of him. The king eventually tells Estelle that he's now the top candidate to take over the throne, since both of his older brothers died from sickness, one right after the other. With the younger princes still being just kids, the weight of the future falls on him, and Estelle just looks down and quietly says yes to the lady in charge. Just when things couldn't get any darker, his mother collapses right on the floor. Estelle rushes over and grabs her, screaming for his mother as his whole world falls apart. The tension in the room snaps as a sword is drawn from its sheath, and the guy with the head bandage tells Estelle that staying in the kingdom is just way too dangerous. Everything went south because of the fight for the throne, leading to Estelle's mother being poisoned. To save his life, Estelle had to ditch the country under the cover of a fake illness, so the two of them fled into the night, even though assassins were still coming for them. He had no choice but to throw on a mask and hide his face, which led to him dropping his real identity to live under the fake name Aslan. Estelle stands there in silence for a second before quietly asking why this happened. He grips his legs tightly, trying to hold back his frustration as he sits there completely crushed, asking why Rorona had to be the one to die. Estelle sits alone in the dark, looking completely broken while he remembers how Rorona has always been the most precious person to him, ever since the day they first met back when she was only 10 years old at the Imperial Palace. The place was packed with people cheering for the Empire and celebrating the fact that the war was finally over, but a younger Estelle wasn't really paying attention to the speeches. He was just hovering by the dessert table wondering if any of the food was actually good. Just as he's about to try something, he feels a tap on his shoulder, and a girl's voice tells him that one snack is sweet while the other is a bit salty. He turns around to find a young Rorona standing there with a big ribbon in her hair, asking him if he likes nuts. He just stares at her, totally caught off guard by her bright violet eyes as they look right back at him. And since he doesn't say anything, she tilts her head and asks if she messed up by suggesting the nuts. Estelle completely panics and shouts that he actually loves them, getting all worked up just to make sure she doesn't think he's upset. He realizes he's making a scene as the adults nearby start staring at them, leaving him standing there feeling awkward while Rorona just watches him. Estelle looks down at the floor, blushing like crazy while he says he's sorry for yelling. Rorona bows her head slightly, telling him she's the one who should apologize for talking to him so suddenly since she probably scared him. He looks away and tries to play it cool, saying it's really nothing while they stand there in the middle of the busy hall and Estelle just stands there looking completely lost, not sure what to do next until the girl holds out a plate filled with all different kinds of cookies for him to see. She tells him that these are her favorite ones and he should totally help himself, standing there with this calm look while Estelle just stares at her, his eyes going wide as he takes in how pretty she is. He gives a quiet reply and reaches out with both hands to take the snack she's offering. Looking back, he thinks about how she was such a kind and beautiful person even back then, but he realizes that even though she looked like a perfect doll, she just wasn't the type to show a lot of emotion on her face. Looking into her eyes, he feels like they say way more than any words ever could, and he thinks about how she's the first person to ever just talk to him like a normal guy instead of royalty. She seems quiet and gentle to him, almost like she's made of spring sunshine while they sit there together. Estelle finally finds his voice and asks her if she'd mind telling him what her name is. She stands up and gives a polite bow, apologizing for not introducing herself sooner and saying her name is Rorona Ryth. She looks right at him and says it's a total honor to finally meet Prince Estelle properly. Estelle is surprised and asks if she knew who he was the whole time, so she admits she was listening to his earlier conversation. He wonders who could have been talking about him when Belvute suddenly shows up behind them, saying he finally found where she was hiding out. Belvute walks right up and asks the prince if his fiancée did anything clumsy while he was gone. Estelle grips the empty plate in his lap, the word fiancé just hanging in the air while it finally clicks for him, and he says out loud that he gets it now. She's engaged to Prince Belvute. Rorona looks back at him with a calm face and simply confirms that's the case, which just leaves Estelle staring at her, looking completely crushed by the news. Thinking back, he feels like he could see this quiet sense of trust in her eyes, and he realizes she's just accepted that marrying Belvute is how things are supposed to be. Estelle looks down to hide his face, barely getting out the words that he understands. Everything that followed after that point is basically just a huge blur in his head, and even after he went back home totally heartbroken, he couldn't stop the memories because every time he saw a plate of cookies, he was immediately reminded of Rorona. Every time the violet season came around, Estelle couldn't help but think of Rorona's clear eyes while back in the present. Prince Belvute is looking pretty rough. Kaiser Bart tries to get his attention by calling out to him, but the prince just lets out a long, tired sigh, clearly stuck in his own head. He starts talking about how pathetic he is for never realizing that Rorona didn't even want to be the crown princess, which leads Estelle to think back to the night of the party. Looking at the crowd, he remembers that Rorona looked so dignified even while her entire life was being flipped upside down. Estelle had actually heard some inside info that the prince was going to dump her, so he'd planned to jump in and propose to her himself right then and there. But everything happened so fast that he couldn't even move, leaving him just standing there watching. Now, he figures his best move is to just stay patient and wait for the official annulment to go through. Aslan mentions he's been getting ready for this for ages, and waiting just a little longer doesn't bother him at all. He thinks back on the feelings he's kept inside for so long while looking at Rorona, realizing that even if he's not sure she'll actually take him back, he can finally be honest about how he feels. He remembers the moment his first love was taken away from him and how it felt like everything changed in an instant. Kaiser Bart breaks the silence, asking what his next move is going to be. Aslan suggests they should just do the things Rorona wasn't able to do herself, which completely catches Kaiser Bart off guard. He asks if the plan is to actually rebuild the Roos family, but Aslan just gives a dark look and says it's the exact opposite of that. He's focused on hunting down the people who took advantage of Rorona's good heart, planning to make every single one of them suffer just as much as she did. Kaiser Bart looks pretty skeptical about the whole thing, asking if Aslan is actually serious about this plan, and Aslan doesn't hesitate for a second, saying that he's absolutely for real as he looks down with a dark grin. Kaiser Bart grabs his papers and says they should start by making sure the crown prince gets exactly what he deserves, since everything seems calm at a large house nearby where some kids are just hanging out under the bright sun. One of the younger boys stands outside holding a ball, looking like he's waiting for something to happen. A woman asks why he's making so much noise, so the kid asks her if she is still not awake yet. The woman explains that she seemed completely worn out and they should just leave her alone for now, which makes the kid run off. Before he goes, the kid looks back and says he hopes his big sister gets well soon. And then the scene shifts to a quiet bedroom where someone is resting in bed while the light pours through the window. A final message pops up, saying his dear is now out of reach and wishing for her to finally rest in peace. Estelle looks out at the estate and makes a cold promise. He's going to make them suffer just like Rorona did. And he tells Kaiser Bart that the first step is making sure the crown prince gets exactly what's coming to him. Kaiser Bart keeps his eyes on the goal, asking how exactly they're going to pull it off. So Estelle explains the plan involves using the House of Lords and the church to put on the pressure. He turns to Kaiser Bart and asks if he can get moving on those preparations right this second. Kaiser Bart bows deeply, telling Estelle that he'll do exactly as His Highness commands. The sun goes down over the quiet mansion as the clouds roll in for the night. Estelle stands alone by a massive window, looking out at the darkness while thinking back to 2 years ago. He looked way more stressed back then, clearly dealing with something heavy, like the fact that returning to the Stella Empire wasn't going to be an option for a long time. Estelle realizes he can't go out looking like a prince, so he's told he needs a total disguise. His black hair and red eyes are dead giveaways for Stella royalty in this kingdom, making it necessary to dye his hair a plain brown color. Along with the hair change, he has to cover up those recognizable eyes with a pair of thick glasses, and once the look is set, Kaiser Bart stands by as the final touches are made. Estelle looks in the mirror and hears that his life as a prince is over for now. From today on, his name is Al. He spends the next 2 years laying low in the Nerna kingdom, just stuck in that house. To him, those days weren't even about living. He was basically just staying alive and nothing else. He stares at his reflection in the glass, barely recognizing the guy looking back and wondering who he's even supposed to be, while Kaiser Bart watches him from the shadows, seeing his friend struggle with the new identity. The man with the cape leads Al through the hall, mentioning how nice the weather is today. But Al is stuck in his own head thinking about Kaiser and everything he's left behind. His eyes look sharp behind those new glasses, taking in every detail of this new life. They head out to a massive field of flowers that stretches out forever. While someone stays back with the horse, Al just stares out at the bright landscape. He looks down at the ground where a patch of violets is growing, and seeing them seems to trigger a specific memory for him. Al turns to his companion and asks if he can just have a moment to himself. The man stays quiet for a second before nodding, telling Al he'll take the horse for a ride while he waits. Once he's finally alone, Al drops down and kneels among the flowers. The image of Rorona flashes in his mind, and he can't help but think her name as he stays there in the field. Suddenly, a voice comes from right behind him saying good day, catching him completely off guard. Al stops moving and realizes he knows that voice from somewhere, making his heart race. Rorona looks down at the flowers in her hands and mentions how beautiful they are. While Al watches her, Al is completely frozen. Gasping as he realizes he's looking right at Rorona from his past, one of the maids calls out from under a tree in the distance, telling Rorona not to wander off too far, but Al just stares at the girl in front of him, wondering if he's actually stuck in some kind of convenient dream. Rorona turns her head to look at him, catching his eye and making him jump a little. She asks if he's looking for something and Al just stammers. Unable to get a real word out, Rorona explains that she dropped the string she was using to tie her bouquet together. So Al tells her to wait a second while he reaches down to his own shoe. And then he holds out his own shoelace and tells her she can have this string for her flowers. Rorona starts to worry about his shoes being messed up, but Al tells her not to sweat it since he just won't run. Al holds out his shoelace and Rorona reaches out to take the string. She thanks him with a soft smile while Al just stands there, totally focused on her. Al tells her his name and that he lives nearby, then asks her who she is and she gets a bit shy, telling him her name is Lorna and she's staying at a nearby villa. Al notices right away that she's using a fake name, making him think she might have some secrets of her own. He tries to keep things casual by talking about how nice the spring flowers are, especially the violets. So using the names Al and Lorna to hide who they really were, the two of them started meeting up in that same flower field all the time, just hanging out and talking about pretty much everything under the sun while sitting in the grass. They'd spend the day sharing things like their favorite flowers and the books they loved to read. It's just a quiet, gentle time for them where things like rank and status don't even matter. Lorna looks out at the view and tells Al she really loves this place, and especially the time they spend together. Al gets a bit flustered and says he feels the same way, and looking out over the field, he realizes that he's really grown to love this spot. Lorna tells him he's a really kind person, so he must have come from a great family, but Al just looks down and says they were actually too good for someone like him. Lorna catches the way he used the past tense and asks what he means by were, and he tells her flat out that he doesn't have anyone left to call family. Al starts opening up, telling her he was actually born in the Stella Empire, and he says his brothers and his mother are all gone now. Al finishes his story by saying there just isn't a place for him back home anymore. They sit there in the grass for a second, and then Rorona starts to speak up, telling Al that he's actually just like her since neither of them has anyone they can really call family. Al asks if she's alone too, but Rorona clarifies that her family is actually still alive. Unlike his, it's just that her father and stepmother don't care about her at all, and they don't even eat together. They sit quietly looking out at the view while Al tells her that sounds incredibly lonely, but Rorona just looks down and tells him she doesn't think it's like that. She says she's simply gotten used to the way things are after all this time. Rorona goes on to explain how since the day she was born, every little thing was decided for her, and because of that, she never got the chance to choose anything for herself. Al just stares at Rorona, really taking in everything she's saying while she looks down at the grass, saying it can't be helped because that's just the way things are, but then she admits that lately, she's started to feel a little tired of it all. Hearing that, Al reaches out and puts a hand on her shoulder to comfort her, and as Rorona looks up at him with shimmering eyes, they just lock eyes for a second. He starts gently patting her head, which catches her off guard since she says it's her first time ever being petted like that, and it actually kind of tickles. Rorona gives him a soft smile and thanks him, saying she's really happy they could talk. So Al smiles back and tells her he feels the same way, but deep down he's just thinking about how powerless he feels in this situation. Al is stuck in his head, thinking about how he doesn't have the guts or the power to just pull Rorona away from all the trouble she's in. And breaking the silence, he calls her by her nickname Rona. He tells her that while she thinks he's a nice guy, he feels like he's just being weak, but then he looks her in the eye and says she's actually the one who is truly kind. Rorona is caught off guard by that and asks if he really means her. So Al explains that after spending time together, he's realized just how good of a person she really is. He tells her that's why he's sure she can keep her head held high, even if her whole life has already been planned out by others. Then he tells her straight up that he really respects her. Rorona can barely believe it and asks if he really respects her, but Al just smiles and says he always will before telling her he'll see her tomorrow. And as he looks at her one last time, something seems to click in his mind. Rorona looks like she's about to break down, her eyes welling up with tears as Al catches a glimpse of her face and is completely stunned by how sad she looks. She tells him she has to go home right away and starts walking off. Al reaches out, calling her name to stop her, but a maid suddenly steps in and blocks his path so he can't follow her. The maid bows low, thanking him for keeping her lady company and being so kind. Al stands there holding a coin, feeling uneasy because Rorona usually looks back at him a few times whenever she leaves. But on this day, she doesn't look back even once as she disappears into the distance. The next day rolls around and Al waits for her at the flower garden, but she never shows up. She doesn't come the day after that either, or even the day after that. Later on, Kaiser Bart shows up, and tells Al the word is that Rorona only came to town to sell a villa. Al stands there with his groceries, while Kaiser Bart asks if Rorona really sold a villa. Turns out, she gave up her late mother's memento just to cover for the crazy amount of money her father and stepmother have been blowing through lately. Al looks down at the coin in his hand, thinking about everything she's going through, and he realizes she's only 12, yet she's already giving up the things she loves most just to help her family, and it makes him see her as such a noble and strong person for taking all that on herself. He clenches his fist with a new look in his eye. He's not just going to sit around anymore because he's decided he needs to become a man who's actually worthy of someone like her. He yells out in frustration and makes a promise to himself. He's going back to the Empire to get the power he needs to protect his life and his name. His goal is to finally be someone who can stand right next to her and speak to her as an equal, and he's going to make sure he's ready for that moment by the time they meet again as Estelle. Estelle stands alone in the quiet room, looking out the tall window as the night sets in, and he holds up a single coin, letting the light of the crescent moon hit the metal just right. He looks at a ring box in his hand, saying he only worked this hard because of her and even started his business just to see her again. But looking at all the gold and files he's gathered, he knows he only got this much power and money because she was there. He tells himself it's fine even if she thinks he's creepy or ends up being scared of him now. Deep down, he just wishes he'd gone after Rorona and told her how he actually felt back then instead of waiting so long, which clearly eats at him as he looks down, trying to deal with all that regret. He looks back out at the night with a serious face, promising Rorona he'll do whatever it takes to make sure she can finally rest in peace. He leans against the glass, practically begging for the chance to make things right, and as the leaves blow past him into the dark sky, he says one last time for her to rest in peace. Someone knocks and calls out from behind the door, catching Estelle's attention as he looks over just in time to see the door creak open and a boot step inside. It's Kaiser Bart, still in his hooded traveling gear, and Estelle immediately asks him how the investigation went. Kaiser starts his report, explaining that the carriage Rorona was using didn't actually have any weird damage on it, so it really seems like the whole crash was just a huge coincidence. He goes on to say the coachman is still stuck in the infirmary completely out of it, and the doctors are saying there's a pretty high chance the guy might never actually wake up again. Estelle takes this in, realizing that if the guy is out, they aren't getting a statement from anyone. But he quickly moves on and asks Kaiser about that other matter they discussed earlier. Kaiser pulls out some papers and confirms that everything turned out exactly how Estelle thought it would. Kaiser Bart stands there looking ready for whatever comes next, his eyes showing he's focused on the plan. Meanwhile, deep inside the walls of the royal castle, Belvute is starting to completely lose his cool, screaming about how Rorona is dead and shaking as he looks at the papers in front of him. He yells out, asking if they're actually serious about a penalty for breaking the engagement. He keeps demanding to know what's going on since he's sure Rorona is gone, but then he looks down and shouts about the invoice he's holding. One of the men tells him to calm down and look closer at the documents. The messenger from the House of Lords explains that these are just claims for medical bills and some payouts. Since his group makes sure the royals don't just do whatever they want, he tells the prince he really doesn't understand how these things work. The story shifts to the church, a massive religious group that has deep roots in the Nirna Kingdom, the Stella Empire, and pretty much everywhere else, making it an organization that handles everything from weddings to legal contracts. One of the officials mentions that they've never actually dealt with a death under these specific conditions before. Both the House of Lords and the Church are heavy hitters, basically the most powerful groups in the land right after the royal family. Belvute throws his arms out in total shock, yelling about having to pay a consolation fee to the House of Ryth. He just can't wrap his head around it, demanding to know why he's the one who has to fork over the cash. Back when the engagement was first set, it was actually a reward from the royals for everything House Ryth had done. The king had personally thanked Count Luce, who felt it was a huge honor, but there was a catch. If Rorona happened to pass away before she ever became the queen, the engagement wouldn't really work as a reward anymore, so a backup contract was signed saying a consolation fee would have to be paid instead. Belvute tries to find a way out, pointing out that Lumina is still there at House Ryth, thinking maybe she can just take Rorona's place. But the official shuts that down immediately. He explains that back when the engagement happened, Lumina hadn't even finished her baptism yet, so she wasn't even an option. The official makes it clear that Lady Rorona was the only person who was supposed to get that reward, meaning Belvute is starting to look pretty intense. He's clearly not happy with where this conversation is going. He tries to scramble for a solution, stammering that they're right and suggesting they just add Lumina to the list right now, but the official doesn't budge at all. He just calmly explains that with Rorona dead, that's not a possibility anymore. Belvute looks like he's about to lose it, his face showing nothing but pure stress as his plan falls apart. The official points right at the document, reminding him that the House of Lords and the Church are involved in this contract, and they are definitely going to be demanding compensation from the royal family. Belvute is just standing there in the back, looking like he wants to disappear while he makes a pained sound, looking completely cornered and sweating as the reality of the situation finally hits him. He starts realizing the claim is actually legitimate and that he really messed up by going against the contract terms, so he just stands there thinking to himself that he really shouldn't have said any of those things in the first place. Belvute tells himself he'll just handle all the duties for the annulment and everything else on his own, thinking that as long as it's just the consolation money, the royal budget should be able to cover the costs. And he figures that if he goes through with marrying Lumina, there's a good chance he can get that money back later. He decides he can live with this since he was already planning on paying out of his own pocket anyway. But the mood in the room shifts instantly when he suddenly shouts out to stop the proceedings, because he slams his hand down on the table and yells that he absolutely won't accept any talk about paying alimony. The official just looks at him and explains that the House of Lords actually forbids one-sided annulments, so doing something like that in front of a giant crowd of people is honestly just beyond ridiculous. He clarifies that the alimony is supposed to be an apology for totally wrecking Rorona's honor and her future, and mentions with a bit of a smirk that no one has been stupid enough to try something like this in decades. The official tells Belvute he might not realize what's actually happening. The prince looks completely stressed out, and then the official adds that there's one more thing coming from the church side of things. He drops a bomb, asking the prince if he's been messing around with another woman while still engaged to Rorona. Belvute just stands there totally shocked. Envelopes start falling everywhere as the official explains they've already got a mountain of evidence and reports proving everything, so he points out that a royal engagement is supposed to be clean and honest. Because of that, the church is officially protesting his behavior. Belvute looks like he's losing it as the official warns him that if every bit of that alimony isn't paid up, the House of Lords is going to have to get together and have a serious talk about whether he even gets to be king. And the guy just casually mentions that he really hopes it doesn't actually end up going that far. He reminds the prince that taking the throne isn't just a given, he needs the church's word and the House of Lords to sign off on it. The official stands there looking pretty satisfied with himself, telling Belvute to think long and hard about how he wants to handle this. The official stares the prince down, telling him straight up that he has to take full responsibility for what he's done. And Belvute just stands there in the middle of the room, totally frozen and unable to find any words. He's completely overwhelmed as the weight of it all hits him, and he starts clutching his hair like he's about to have a breakdown. He ends up dropping to his knees on the floor, curled in a ball and asking why any of this is even happening. Meanwhile, Lumina is back at the estate looking like she's on cloud 9. She's blushing and wondering when Belvute is finally going to come for her. And the sun is shining over the mansion while she stays tucked away inside, completely clueless about the disaster. She's actually laying there daydreaming about having 3 kids with him, thinking about how adorable their family would be, but the door pops open and she asks the maid what's up, only to hear that the madame is waiting for her in the drawing room. The maid adds that some pretty serious people from the House of Lords and the church have arrived as well, so everyone gathers together in the drawing room, and it looks like the party is officially over for her too. Belbarassa sits there looking totally elegant, asking if all this is just for sympathy and alimony money, while Lumina puts on her best sad face, thinking she really needs to nail the part of the grieving sister. She acts all humble and tells them she's getting way more credit than she deserves. Then she asks if the alimony is for the broken engagement, and if she can help pay for it, acting like the prince would be so happy if they did that. She's practically singing. The vibe in the room shifts instantly as the officials just stare at her. One looks shocked, while the other looks completely suspicious. One of the guys from the House of Lords speaks up, telling Lumina he heard she was actually pretty close with the prince. Lumina freezes up, looking back at them with a totally blank face as she realizes the officials aren't buying her act at all. They're just watching her with these cold, judging eyes. She starts laughing nervously, trying to play it off by saying it's definitely not what it looks like. Lumina puts on a sweet face and tells them Lord Belvute was just giving her advice, and they aren't close like that, but the official doesn't buy it. He asks if it's true she went out to the outskirts alone with the prince recently. While behind the scenes, the prince was actually celebrating the broken engagement with her, and Lumina was loving every second. The two of them were getting way too close for comfort, looking like they were about to cross a line. Back in the room, Lumina starts sweating as she realizes she's caught, but she keeps that fake smile up, insisting it's fine and that she's still a maiden, even offering to be examined just to prove her point. The official doesn't back down, saying if they really are in a messed up relationship, then the church is going to have to step in. Belbarassa looks totally shocked and yells that the guy is being way too dramatic about the whole thing. Lumina starts panicking too, doubling down and shouting that she was really just asking the prince for some advice. The official just rubs his head in frustration, telling her that being alone with an engaged guy is a massive scandal no matter what. The official looks Lumina right in the eye and asks if she has any idea how bad she's making noble ladies look, and Lumina just stands there shaking, gripping her dress while she tries to find the right words to say. But before she can speak, the official adds that there's one more thing, making Belbarassa get even more nervous as she asks what else there could be. He drops a bombshell, demanding they refund the entire dowry meant for Rorona's wedding, and Belbarassa just loses it. She's completely frozen, staring at him like she can't believe he's actually asking for the money back. The official doesn't skip a beat, asking her why she looks so shocked by such a simple request, and he reminds her that the dowry was strictly meant for Rorona to get her wedding clothes and stuff ready. Since the whole marriage is officially off, he tells them straight up that the money needs to be returned immediately, so Belbarassa starts to panic, admitting he's right but clearly stalling because she doesn't have the cash. Lumina notices her mom is totally spiraling and asks what's going on, realizing they're in a massive hole. The official stares at the two women across from him. The room is dead silent until Belbarassa tries to find a way out, saying that they should just offset the dowry money against the gift money they're expecting. She acts like it's a great idea, but the official isn't having it. He gives her a cold look and asks why there's even a need to offset anything. Belbarassa starts sweating, claiming it would be a huge pain to get the academy involved. She then suggests that since Lumina is probably the prince's next fiancé, the wedding funds would just end up going to her daughter anyway, so they might as well just keep the cash. The official admits that while it could happen, there hasn't been a single conversation about a new engagement yet, and Belbarassa's face goes pale as she tries to come up with another excuse, but she's cut off before she can even start. He leans in closer, his voice getting sharper as he asks if she's suggesting the prince and Lumina are already promised to each other. He finishes the thought with a brutal question, asking if they were already together while Rorona was still right there in the house. Lumina and her mom just sit there with their heads down, completely caught in their own lie and unable to say a single word. Lumina and her mother sit in total silence in the middle of the room. Everything has gone south and Lumina looks like she's seen a ghost, while Belbarassa just collapses into herself. The weight of the situation is finally hitting them. Lumina is stuck in her own head, wondering why all of this is happening right now, especially since she thought that once Rorona was finally out of the way, things would be easy. She really believed she was headed for a perfect marriage with Prince Belvute, but that dream is falling apart. Meanwhile, Belbarassa starts to lose her cool, shouting about what she's even supposed to do. Lumina tries to ask what's wrong, but her mom just keeps panicking and asking Lumina for an answer that she doesn't have. Then the truth comes out. Belbarassa admits that the dowry money they were holding onto is completely gone. Lumina just stares at her, totally stunned by what she's hearing, and then Belbarassa tries to make excuses, claiming she only meant to borrow a bit since she figured the royals would cover the wedding costs anyway. Lumina is losing it, asking what the money even went toward, but her mom just says she couldn't help herself. A bunch of expensive rings are sparkling on her fingers, and it's pretty obvious where the cash went. Lumina stares at her, realizing her mom actually blew all that money on jewels, leaving them with nothing but a massive problem, since that was the cash the royal family trusted them with in the first place. Lumina tells her that what's done is done, but then says she's going to have to tell her father everything. Seeing the look on her mom's face, Lumina realizes there's more to it. She asks if she's been stealing even more money. Lumina reaches out and grabs her mom's hand. The room goes quiet for a second before she puts on a fake smile, telling her mom it's okay and that their father will definitely back them up. She keeps the act going, reminding her mom that the royals will be sending over a sympathy grant soon anyway. Belbarassa finally relaxes, looking relieved as she agrees that everything might actually turn out fine. Lumina says they need to get their assets in order first, sounding pretty confident while she and her mom wait for Cezanne to look through the books at his desk to see what's left. Cezanne just laughs at the idea of a dowry refund and tells them it's impossible. Lumina and her mom can't even find the words to respond, just standing there frozen as Cezanne looks them in the eye and repeats himself, making it clear he isn't joking. He tells them straight up that the Count's funds have already run completely dry, which leaves them stunned as he explains there is literally zero money left in the entire earldom. The two of them just stare back at him in total disbelief, but he doesn't stop there since he starts listing everything off, from the villa's upkeep to their crazy spending on clothes and jewelry. It turns out the only thing they actually have left is a massive mountain of debt. Cezanne keeps laying out the brutal truth, telling them they can't even cover the servants' wages anymore, let alone pay back a dowry. He stands there gesturing to the empty books while Lumina completely loses it, screaming that it's all a lie because she can't wrap her head around being broke. She's shaking with anger, but Cezanne doesn't blink, explaining that Rorona was the only reason the family stayed afloat this long by finding ways to get money. Now that she's gone, the well has officially run dry, and there's absolutely nothing left for him to do. The reality of their situation is finally starting to sink in, and Lumina is just standing there in shock, realizing her big sister was actually the one carrying the entire family's weight. She can't believe it, so she tries to deflect the blame, calling Sezin a useless failure and yelling that managing the estate is his responsibility. She's desperate to blame anyone but herself, though Sezin just takes it. He tells her that if she needs to curse him out to feel better, she should go right ahead since he's already used to it. The Count spent all his time hurling insults at him too. He looks completely exhausted with the whole family, while Belbarassa stands off to the side, clenching her fist in silence. Sezin lets them know one last thing. Rorona already went ahead and found a buyer for the villa they're standing in. Sezin keeps laying it out, saying if they just sell the property now, they can actually clear the debt. Lumina stomps her foot in a total tantrum, screaming at him to just sell the place this second since Sezin has to remind her that the Count already shot that proposal down. He explains that Rorona was actually the one who suggested selling it in the first place. The news hits Lumina and Belbarassa like a ton of bricks, and Sezin doesn't stop there. He mentions Rorona also suggested the madam should sell off her jewelry. Belbarassa completely loses her cool, screaming that she refuses to give up her things while Lumina just watches her, terrified. Sezin stays calm and asks if she'd really say no even if it meant getting the basic funds they need, but Belbarassa just looks cold, telling him flat out that she's never letting anyone else have her jewels. She starts naming other things to get rid of, like the horses or the art in the mansion. She even tells him to fire the servants if it saves her treasure, which leaves Lumina standing there totally shaken, asking her mother how she could even say something like that. Belbarassa can't believe what she's hearing and asks Sezin if he's actually being serious right now, but Sezin doesn't blink, so she loses it and screams that he's an incompetent fool who's officially fired too. Lumina watches the whole meltdown in total shock, while Sezin just stands there taking the heat. Belbarassa isn't done yet, ordering him to make sure that villa is sold the second the master gets back. She starts walking away, tossing out that his severance pay is coming out of those property funds and demands to know if he understands the situation, not even looking back as she heads for the door. Belbarassa storms out of the room, leaving Lumina standing there worried while Sezin leans over his desk. Sezin stares down with this really dark, intense look on his face that shows he's reached his limit. Lumina catches a glimpse of his expression and starts to get a really bad feeling as Sezin looks her right in the eyes and says that at this point, everything is already too late. Lumina and Belbarassa stand there for a second before the mother makes a frustrated sound and turns to leave. Sezin is left behind, clenching his fist so hard his knuckles turn white while he watches them go, thinking to himself that their selfishness really has no limits at all. He looks down, realizing the verbal abuse he's taking now is nothing compared to what Rorona went through. So he puts on a brave face and tells himself he still has a lot of work left to do. Sezin knows he has his own family to support, but he's also focused on getting severance pay and recommendations ready. One of the older servants just smiles, saying he's at the age where it's probably time to retire anyway. The family thinks Sezin has no money left to give them, but that's not actually the whole story because Rorona had been secretly setting aside all the cash she made from her trade deals to help the servants, and that money is being managed as their own private property, kept far away from the greedy hands of her family. Sezin thinks about how Rorona always put the estate first. Even when things were rough, he looks pretty determined, promising himself that he's going to make sure her final plans actually happen. Sitting at his desk, he checks his list and sees that the last thing to handle is the maid's recommendation letters. He pauses for a second, realizing there's one person he hasn't seen around the house lately. He remembers when Belbarassa first brought a new girl in and told everyone to treat her well. The girl was Kaiser, an 18-year-old who seemed pretty quiet when she first started. But when Sezin asks where she's at now, one of the other maids says she's probably out in the city messing around again. The maid even admits she would have kicked Kaiser out a long time ago if she wasn't the madam's special hire. Sezin stays quiet for a bit, just thinking about the whole weird situation. He eventually just tells himself to leave it to the madam to deal with, since it's her problem anyway. It's late at night at the estate and Rorona is sitting up in her bed. She's wide awake now, just thinking about how her mother is acting lately. Lumina can tell her mom is really depressed and something is definitely wrong. So she tries to help by suggesting they sell some of the jewelry. They need the cash for the settlement money, but Belbarassa completely loses it. She can't believe her own daughter is trying to take her jewels away too. Then a sudden noise from downstairs catches Lumina's attention. She looks over, wondering what's happening until she spots someone at the door. She asks what's going on as a man in heavy boots steps into the hallway. The house staff all drop into deep bows as Count Luce finally walks through the front door. He looks completely drained. Up close, his eyes show he's exhausted and probably dealt with some heavy stuff, but Lumina's face just lights up. She's all smiles seeing him and calls out to her father, quickly running over to greet him. She tells him she's been waiting for him to get home, but he barely even looks at her. Lumina pulls back in total shock as she gets a good look at her father. Something is definitely off and she covers her mouth, catching the heavy scent of alcohol on him. She asks if he's been drinking, but Count Luce just stares her down with a cold look. He asks if it's wrong to drink and if she really plans on lecturing her own father right now. Lumina flinches and tries to backpedal immediately. She tells him it isn't like that at all, but he's not having it. He leans in and asks what's up with her attitude lately. He says it's like she isn't even sad about Rorona being dead, which leaves Lumina totally speechless. She just stammers, trying to think of any excuse to tell him, then he asks why she never talked to him. He asks if it was because Rorona was mistreating her this whole time. Lumina's eyes start to sparkle as she listens to him. She completely misreads the situation and starts thinking about how he usually stays in the detached villa. She always figured he just didn't care about her at all, but seeing him like this makes her wonder if he's actually just worried about her. She's practically glowing now, thrilled at the idea. Luce stands over Lumina like a dark shadow, looking completely terrifying. Lumina's eyes go wide as she realizes things are taking a turn for the worse. Luce suddenly loses his cool and yells at her, asking why she'd let such a massive scandal go public. He keeps going, shouting that because of her actions, Rorona isn't the perfect lady anymore and Lumina can barely get a word in. She tries to call out to him, sounding totally shaken, but Luce just looks at her with total disgust. He tells her she should have kept it all hidden. Then he strikes her across the face, telling her she's just caused a bunch of useless trouble. Right then, Belvute rushes into the room and yells at him, asking what he's doing to Lumina. She's looking at him with pure rage, looking like she's ready to kill. She shields her daughter and screams at Luce, asking what's wrong with him for hitting his kid the second he gets home, while he just stands there without saying a word. Luce and Belvute stand there staring each other down, and neither one of them looks like they're ready to back down. Out in the hallway, the butler and the maid are peeking through the door, looking totally freaked out by the huge fight. Lumina tries to play peacemaker, telling her mom to calm down since it looks like her dad has been drinking, while her mom catches the smell of booze on him. Belvute snaps her head away in total annoyance, but Luce just stands there, ignoring her attitude. He asks her how she can act so relaxed when the entire family is basically in a crisis, which really sets her off. She repeats the word back at him and yells for him to watch his tone, but she doesn't stop there. She demands to know who he thinks is actually responsible for making her act this way in the first place. Luce just starts screaming right back at her, saying he's completely done with her constant backtalk. Lumina stands right between them as they keep fighting, totally stunned and wondering how everything got so messed up. Looking at the house from the outside, it's clear she never really believed her parents were ever a happy couple. The family was basically living separate lives. His father stayed in a different place and only really went to visit Rorona once in a while. And looking back, Lumina always felt like the only reason her father didn't care about her was because of her sister. She grew up watching him be a happy, doting dad to Rorona, and she was convinced that her sister being there was the only problem. It even got to the point where she started thinking that if Rorona just disappeared, her father would finally have to look at her. Back in the present, she's practically begging her parents to stop fighting, yelling for her father and mother to just calm down. She tells them that what they really need right now is to actually talk things through instead of just screaming at each other. The two of them finally go quiet, both looking totally drained and sweaty from the blow-up. So Luce turns away and asks if the preparations for Rorona's funeral are finally finished. Belvute tells him no and explains that Rorona's body is actually still being kept over at the church because she was in such a bad state that they won't even let the family see her until she's presentable. Luce decides that the funeral stuff for Rorona can just wait for now, and Belvute cuts in, telling him they have something way more important to talk about. But Luce just asks if she's bringing up money again. She doesn't even say anything back, just standing there with a look on her face. Luce smirks and asks if he hit a nerve, telling her that all she ever cares about is her dresses and jewelry, and he adds on that it's actually kind of impressive how she never gets bored of buying that stuff. Belvute tries to defend herself but then snaps back, pointing out that he's the one who gathered all those soldiers at the villa, and she reminds him that the estate is the one footed the bill for every single one of their meals. Luce completely loses his cool and yells at her to shut up. Then, he asks her what's so wrong with looking after people who are actually loyal to him, since to a commander, soldiers are everything. Belvute doesn't back down though, telling him right to his face that keeping an army is pointless now that things are peaceful. Luce looks like he's about to explode. asking Belbarassa if she's actually trying to insult him right now, and Lumina jumps in between them, begging them to stop and saying she'll be the one to apologize for her mom's big mouth and all the money she's spent. Belbarassa is totally confused, asking Lumina what the hell she's talking about, but the girl just keeps pleading with her mom to just chill out. Lumina is shaking as she watches them, wondering why everything is falling apart like this. The timing couldn't be worse for a family feud, and everyone knows the whole estate is literally on the edge of total ruin. Lumina's eyes well up as she tells herself she won't let this happen, desperately wishing for someone to help, so she turns away from the chaos to find another way out of this mess. She tracks down some staff and asks where the trustee is, explaining that she needs him to talk to her father about the finances right away. The maid looks pretty nervous as she explains that the guy actually bylaid and left the estate right before the count even got home. Lumina is completely losing it, unable to believe the trustee actually ran away and left them in this mess. Luce stands there looking stressed while Belbarassa just ignores the tension. So Lumina realizes there's no one else left to handle this and tells herself she has to explain the whole thing to her father. She speaks up, telling her dad that a messenger from the House of Lords showed up recently to demand the settlement money back from her sister's cancelled engagement. Luce is totally blindsided by the news, asking her what she just said because he had no idea things were that bad. Lumina keeps going, explaining that while the royal family is supposed to pay them back directly, she initially thought they could just use that cash to settle the debt with the House of Lords. But the Lords are being difficult and insisting that the original money has to be returned before they deal with anything else. Luce takes a second and then just says if the higher-ups made a decision, they should just shut up and follow orders. Lumina looks at him, thinking that's such a classic soldier response for her dad to have, but she knows they're in real trouble. Luce stands there with his arms crossed, looking completely done as he drops the news that all the preparation funds are totally gone. He's shaking with rage, demanding to know what the hell is going on with their money. Lumina looks like she's about to lose it, quietly starting to explain that her mother was the one behind it. Luce loses his temper, screaming at Belbarassa for messing up again while she just begs him for forgiveness. He tells her straight up that all she ever buys is overpriced trash, but she tries to argue that she didn't have a choice. She makes excuses, saying the sellers pressured her by claiming the stuff would be gone if she didn't buy it immediately. Luce just calls her a complete fool. He's yelling so loud that Lumina has to step in and try to get him to chill out. He snaps back that there's no way he can stay calm, telling his wife to sell her own jewelry if she needs cash because he's not helping, which leaves her completely shocked. She starts screaming back, telling him he's actually the one who needs to sell off his private villa. Lumina is left standing there while her father barks out orders for them to get back to the estate and actually start managing the family business for once. Luce is absolutely losing it, screaming at his wife and asking if she really expects him to act like some lowly merchant. He goes off about how she has a lot of nerve being so rude to a proud man of the military like him. He reminds her that managing the family's gold is her job as his wife, but instead, she just wastes all of it and the servants are totally freaked out, rushing in to beg the master and madam to stop the fighting before it gets worse. Lumina looks like she's about to cry, pleading with both of them to just stop this right now. But Belbarassa isn't backing down, yelling back that she's only asking him to actually act like a lord for once. It's a far cry from how things used to be, back when everyone thought the family's future was going to be perfect, and Luce just stands there seething while the help watches on. Lumina realizes that even though she hoped for the best, the reality of her family falling apart is hitting her hard. Amidst all the chaos, Rorona finally shows up looking as calm and elegant as ever. The sun shines through the trees outside the palace, where Kaiser reports to Prince Estelle that the House of Lords and the Church have officially accepted all the evidence they turned over. Estelle tells him he did a good job, thinking about how this is the perfect chance for them to finally get some real leverage over the royal family, and then he shifts the subject, asking Kaiser for an update on that other matter they've been working on. Kaiser lets him know they've already given their consent, so they should be hearing back from them pretty soon. Estelle just takes it in with a calm look, but Kaiser sounds a bit hesitant, asking if the prince is actually serious about going through with this. Estelle confirms he is, telling Kaiser that out of everyone, he's the one who should really get why this has to happen. He grips his hand into a tight fist, saying that when it comes to Rorona, he's not playing around. He lays out the final part of the plan, which is to swap Rorona's body with someone else's to keep her safe. The scene moves over to the Meishi Guild headquarters, a massive, fancy building where the guild master Zelio is sitting down with Lord Hangrieve. Zelio starts off by admitting that the Senzu cloth is definitely some high-quality merchandise, but he's got some major concerns. He tells Hangrieve that since this stock is way bigger than anything they've handled before, he's not even sure the guild can manage it all. Hangreave just laughs it off, telling Zelio he's being way too modest. He points out that the last batch they got their hands on sold out almost instantly, and Zelio tries to stay grounded, saying that was probably just a stroke of good luck. Hangreave agrees it was a profitable deal, but he's not stopping there, pushing Zelio to take on an even bigger shipment this time. He's got this big, confident smile on his face while Zelio looks pretty stressed out. He tells the guy the only reason he's even entertaining the idea is because of the guild's reputation. He puts on a polite smile and lets out a sigh, but deep down, he's starting to feel like something about this whole setup is just wrong. The deal looks incredible on paper though, because they're buying so much cloth at once. The price they're getting is basically a steal, and Hangreave closes the pitch by letting him know the entire stock is ready for immediate delivery. Zelio admits that the quality of the cloth is definitely top tier and everyone expects it to sell well, but he can't stop worrying. It's only been 2 weeks since the last deal, and despite being partners, getting a massive shipment that usually takes months delivered instantly feels completely wrong. He starts sweating as he realizes everything is just moving way too fast for comfort, so he just grips his pants in frustration, wishing someone was there to help. He thinks to himself that things would be different if Lady Rorona were still around, remembering how he actually felt relieved when she died because it meant he was finally in charge, and now he feels like a total jerk for thinking that way. Hangreave notices the pause and asks why he's hesitating now, especially since he was so against cutting back the order numbers last time. Zelio tries to play it cool, explaining that with a shipment this big, they're going to need some extra time just to get the delivery ready, which Hangreave agrees with, though he immediately counters by offering to just lease the entire warehouse to him. Zelio is stunned, thinking the whole deal is just way too good to be true. And that's when it clicks that this exact feeling of unease is why Rorona never wanted to sign the contract in the first place. Zelio is sweating and looks completely stressed out. The pressure of the deal is finally starting to get to him, and he starts thinking back to Rorona. He remembers her saying she had a good eye for quality but no real business talent, and that she could only handle trades because of her time with the young lady. The memory of Rial shows up too. He points out that even though the guild lost Rorona, who was their main pillar, he's actually pretty surprised by how calm Zelio seems to be acting. Zelio grips his pants tight as he realizes he was being a total idiot for celebrating earlier, and it's only hitting him now, so Hangreave has to speak up and call his name just to get him to snap back to reality. Zelio quickly plays it off and says it's a great offer. He even tells him he'd like to move forward with everything right now, but Hangreave stops him there. He says that's fine, but he won't be able to finish the paperwork and finalize the deal today. He just stares at Zelio with this sharp, quiet look, like he's reading every move the guy makes. Zelio laughs it off and says he has some stuff to take care of anyway, so he asks if they can just meet up tomorrow afternoon to finish. Hangreave repeats the time back to him just to be sure, then mentions that if tomorrow is too much of a hassle, he won't be mad if Zelio takes the business elsewhere. So Zelio just sits there sweating while Hangreave stops to think for a second. The merchant brushes it off though. He says he's not looking for anyone else because he brought this deal here specifically because he trusts in the power of the guild, which catches Zelio totally off guard and leaves him staring in shock. Zelio can't believe how easily the guy just agreed to everything, while Hangreave smiles and thanks him for the consent. He says it makes sense since they'll be partners for a while, but then he mentions that things must be pretty tough for Zelio lately, because it's always a big worry when there isn't anyone around to give you good advice. Zelio's face goes completely blank as he tries to process what the guy is even talking about. Hangreave gets up to leave, saying he'll see him later, and a flustered Zelio can barely stammer out a goodbye before the door finally clicks shut behind him, leaving Zelio alone with his thoughts. Zelio sits there completely stunned, sweating as he tries to process what he just heard, and it turns out she was actually the guildmaster at the Miishi company all along. But hardly anyone who's been around since the beginning even knew Rorona was the one behind it. So Hangreave points out that even Master Hungrick never got the chance to meet her in person. He looks thoughtful, wondering if she saw through everything and knew her death would leave him in a bind like this. Back in the room, Zelio is just staring off into space while he realizes that with her gone, there's a good chance he'll never see those people again. Losing a long-time important customer like her is a huge blow, and thinking about the deal she was hesitant to make is starting to make him feel really uneasy and honestly, kind of scared. He sits all alone in the quiet room, just whispering Rorona's name to himself. Inside the mansion, Lumina starts yelling at everyone to hurry up and get the carriage ready right now, and she's so worked up that she practically knocks the maid over while rushing out the door. With a look in her eyes that's honestly kind of terrifying, she screams at them to get to the royal castle as fast as possible to see Lord Belvute. The carriage takes off instantly, the wheels spinning fast against the stone ground as it races through the city streets, heading straight for the castle at full speed. Sitting inside, Lumina is a total mess, biting her thumb and sweating as she tries to figure out what to do, because she's completely losing it, chewing on her finger while the pressure starts to get to her. She can't stop thinking about the massive fight her parents had, where her dad yelled at her mom to sell her jewels, and her mom shouted back that he should be the one giving up the villa. It was a disaster, and it ended with her dad just walking away, complaining that the whole conversation was a waste of time. Back then, the maid told Lumina she looked way too pale and needed to go lie down, and all she could do was quietly agree. The sun is shining over the mansion roof as everything seems quiet outside. It's a peaceful-looking day from the street, but things are different inside. Lumina finally wakes up and realizes she slept way too long, her head is pounding, and she starts calling out for someone to come help her. Just then, a voice calls her name from the shadows as a face peeks through the door with a weird smile. Lumina jumps and asks if that's her mother. But suddenly Belbarassa grabs her arm hard and pulls her close. Belbarassa looks her right in the eyes and says she's the only one she can turn to for help now, and she starts talking about a friend of hers named Baron Gills, explaining that even though the guy is pretty old, he's got a huge fortune and a high social status to go with it. She mentions he's been feeling pretty lonely ever since he lost his wife a little while back, which makes Lumina completely freak out. She just stares in shock and says there's no way she's doing this. Belbarassa keeps pushing, telling Lumina that the Baron will definitely like her once they meet, and that he'll even provide financial support. She asks for an answer, but Lumina can only stare back with her heart racing in her chest. Pulling her into a tight hug, Belbarassa wears a creepy smile while asking her daughter to help her out. Lumina is shaking so hard she can barely breathe, letting out a small gasp as the weight of the request hits her. Belbarassa starts to step back, looking over her shoulder with a cold stare that makes Lumina completely spiral. She just stands there in shock, unable to believe what her mother is actually suggesting. The woman grabs Lumina's dress with her lace gloves, literally begging her to go along with the plan. She looks up with a desperate smile, telling the girl that if she does this, she won't have to lose her lifestyle or her things, but Lumina's lip starts to tremble as she finally realizes where her mother's priorities are. Through her tears, she asks her mother if those jewels are really more important to her than her own daughter. Belbarassa stays quiet, just looking down at the floor with a dark look on her face. She suddenly puts on a fake smile and says Lumina's name, but it's not working anymore. Lumina loses it and tells her mother not to come anywhere near her before sprinting out of the room. Sitting alone and shaking, Lumina's mind starts racing. All she can think about is how much she needs to see Lord Belvute. She just wants to be in his arms and is totally convinced that he's the only one who can save her now. The girl keeps replaying everything in her head, thinking about the time he told her that he actually loved her, and how he promised her that they were going to get married. She holds onto the memory of him swearing to make her his queen, using it to block out the mess her life has become. At this point, she doesn't give a damn about her mom or her dad. She doesn't even care if their whole house goes bankrupt, because in her mind, she's still going to marry into the royal family and leave all this behind. Lumina keeps spiraling, telling herself that Belvute is the only person she's ever really wanted since the start. She's obsessed with the fact that she's the one who finally managed to steal him away from Rorona. Getting more desperate, she tells Belvute to just wait for her because she's on her way to him right now. But a sudden, loud bang at the door cuts her off and sends her jumping back in a total panic. She lets out a scream, frantically yelling to find out what's going on or what's holding the door shut. While all that drama is going down at the house and Lumina is trying to make her escape, Cezanne is across town finishing up some business, looking over a stack of papers and confirming that every single debt has been paid off. He looks completely drained, saying it was a crazy amount of money to move, but he's just relieved they settled it all in one day. As he walks down the street, he tells himself he's done everything he can to handle things for Lady Rorona. But then, the story shifts back to what happened the night before at the main estate. The speaker hands over a recommendation letter and the final pay, and then the head butler and the maid thank Cezanne for everything he's done for them. Cezanne replies that the pleasure was all his, because the head butler asks Cezanne what he's planning to do now that he's finished, and Cezanne tells the butler not to worry about him at all, but Cezanne apologizes for having to cut things short. He tells the butler to handle the affairs for the Madam and Lady Lumina, so Cezanne hands over the final documents. The butler promises he'll definitely take charge of everything from here, as it turns out every last bit of the money Lady Rorona left behind is officially gone. Cezanne thinks to himself that his job is finally over, but then realizes it's not quite done yet. He looks at a letter and says to himself that he'll be coming for Lady Rorona very soon, and the letter from the church says they've finished processing Rorona's remains and need him to come pick them up. The narrator points out that the Count's family only cares about their own immediate desires, showing Cezanne holding a letter while thinking there's no way he can bring Rorona back to people like that. and he notes to himself that the church really didn't do a good job taking care of his lady at all. Normally, when a parishioner dies in an accident, the church follows a standard routine for a death confirmation and a ceremony to return the body, making sure the remains are sent right back to the family. But Rorona wasn't just anyone, she was super religious, always went to services, gave plenty of money, and poured her heart into charity work for the community. So Cezanne stands there looking at the letter, thinking about how things should have gone. It took 3 whole days for the church to finish their process, even though they're supposed to give the highest level of treatment to the bodies of people as devoted as her. Cezanne snaps out of it, thinking he doesn't have time to just stand around. He starts moving since he needs to reach that promised spot as fast as possible. He's looking pretty focused when a voice calls out to him, saying they were just looking for Lord Shazam. Cezanne stops in his tracks as the postman on horseback tips his hat and explains he was heading to the Count's place with some express mail, but he hands a letter over right there, saying his job is done and heading off. Cezanne is totally caught off guard and he stares at the envelope, wondering who could possibly be sending something specifically to him. He looks closer at the writing on the front. The letter is addressed from Sister Klee. Something feels off though, and he suddenly looks around, wondering if someone is watching him from the shadows. He decides to brush it off for now and tells himself they need to get a move on. Outside, a guy in a sharp white uniform is waiting by a carriage, looking ready to head out. Belbarassa spots the prince and can't believe he made it so fast after only getting the news this morning. Prince Belvute doesn't waste any time and immediately asks how Lumina is doing since Belbarassa looks completely devastated, struggling to find the right words to explain the situation, and the prince just stands there looking tense, waiting for her to finally say something as he asks if Lumina's life is at least out of danger. Belbarassa tells him she's going to live, but it doesn't change how badly she was hurt, leaving Belvute looking frustrated because this whole situation makes it a lot harder for him to bring up anything about money now, and he knows he's in a spot where he can't actually afford the settlement or alimony for breaking things off with Rorona using his own cash. It's a pretty pathetic look for a crown prince to be this broke, but he starts coming up with a plan, so he decides to frame this visit to Lumina as a massive favor to the Count, thinking that if he tells them he wants to officially take Lumina, his secret lover, as his new fiancé, the Count might actually be cool about it and lower the amount of money he has to pay back. Prince Belvute thinks that if he plays his cards right today, everything will work out for him. Belbarassa knocks on the door and tells Lumina she's coming in, and the door slowly creaks open, letting them into the room where Belvute immediately covers his face, grossed out by the heavy smell of medicine and blood. He can't believe how bad it is, but he hears Lumina's weak voice coming from the bed, where she's barely mumbling his name. She looks completely out of it, and Belbarassa tells him that the girl has been calling out for him this whole time. It really sells the drama of the situation, so Belbarassa begs him to just listen to what she has to say. Belvute looks pretty shaken up seeing her like this, and he doesn't waste another second, rushing over to the side of her bed because he reaches out and yells her name, acting like he's totally devastated. Lumina's hand twitches as she slowly opens her eyes, looking all teary and fragile while she starts to whisper his name, and she finally gets the words out, calling for Lord Belvute as if she's just relieved he's actually there. Belvute stands over the bed looking like he's seen a ghost, completely shaken by the state she's in, but Lumina just looks up at him with tears in her eyes, saying she can't believe he actually came to see her. He sits down and tells her he heard about the accident, saying he's just glad she's alive, but she just cries and tells him it hurts so much. When he asks what even happened, she explains that a dog suddenly jumped out in front of the carriage, and Belvute tells her to just focus on resting and getting her body healthy again, reaching out to comfort her as she softly thanks him for being so kind. She's a total mess, covered in bandages and bruises from head to toe, looking like she's in a lot of pain, which makes Belvute look even more nervous, like there's something heavy on his mind he needs to bring up. He starts to tell her the truth about something, but she interrupts him to say she's sorry because it turns out she can't pay back the initial payment she owes him right now. Belvute looks at her like he has no idea what she's talking about, repeating the part about the initial payment while Lumina just hangs her head in total shock. Turns out, Lumina told him this whole story about how her family completely blew through all their cash, explaining that they wasted the dowry the royals gave them for Rorona's wedding, leaving the House of Ryth with absolutely nothing left. She claims her parents' expensive tastes were the problem, and to get out of the hole, they were trying to force her to be some nobleman's second wife. She looks up with those watery eyes, really trying to sell how much of a victim she is in all of this, and finally just begs him to help her. Belvute stands there thinking he really shouldn't be saying anything at all, but Lumina keeps pressing, calling out his name. He looks down, finally admitting that he's in a similar spot because it turns out he actually came there looking for a way to get some money himself, leaving Lumina completely stunned in the background. She lets out a shout, unable to believe what she's hearing as things take a turn she didn't see coming. Belbarassa shows up and finds Belvute in the hall, greeting him as Your Highness while she asks if he's seen Lumina lately, going on about how pitiful the girl's situation has become. Belvute tells her he has, but mentions he was told her condition wasn't actually life-threatening, though Belbarassa quickly points out that for a noble lady, having scars like that means her social life is basically over. He looks pretty down as he admits she's probably right, which is when Belbarassa starts begging him, acting like she's speaking as someone who cares deeply for Lumina's well-being. She finally drops the question, asking if he could provide the funds to pay for Lumina's medical treatment. Belvute is totally caught off guard by the request, but she keeps going, saying it's embarrassing to admit, claiming that between Rorona's funeral and all their other expenses, their family's finances are stretched thin. Belbarassa puts on a sad face while Belvute just stares at her, wondering what this woman is even talking about. Belvute is totally over it. He tells Belbarassa he's sorry, but he's really just thinking about how fast he can get out of that house and away from her. Inside the main room of the estate, Count Luce is standing around talking to one of the staff members when he completely loses his cool, shouting at the guy and asking if the prince really already left without saying anything. He sits down and crosses his arms, complaining that being royalty doesn't give the prince an excuse to be that rude, and the whole conversation felt like a total waste of time. Luce gets this mean look on his face, thinking to himself that now that things have fallen apart, Lumina doesn't even have any strategic use for him anymore, which leads back to a look at what happened just the day before at the estate. Belbarassa was having a total meltdown, crying and yelling about how she was never loved and that her jewelry is the only thing she has left. Luce just stands there looking annoyed, telling her to quit the crying since she was the one who supposedly forgave him for everything in the first place. He looks at all the expensive stuff around and reminds her that screaming isn't going to make money magically show up, stating pretty coldly that he's just going to sell off the things he doesn't care about to cover the cost. Belbarassa can barely find the words to respond when Luce tells her he's also going to start cutting back on spending at the villa. She just looks away with a bitter expression, clearly not thrilled about losing her lifestyle, while Luce acts like he's being a hero, claiming that if his wife has to lose her jewels, it's his duty as a man to share that burden. He stands there with his arms crossed, looking all proud of himself, saying that's exactly how a real soldier should act, but then a sharp, calculating smile starts to spread across a face in the room. Belbarassa turns to him with a dark look and says she actually has a pretty great idea, making Luce narrow his eyes and ask her what she's getting at. She explains that she knows a guy looking for a second wife, someone who's loaded and even has a gold mine on his land. The guy is Baron Jill, and she mentions he was actually a pretty big deal for his contributions during the war, though she trails off with a creepy look, hinting that there's a catch to the guy. Baron Jill is shown as a guy who likes nothing more than hurting women and making them cry. He's a total monster, and plenty of people have actually offered up their wives or daughters just to pay off their debts to him. It gets even darker, since there's apparently no end to the lovers who just end up dead because of him. Luce asks Belbarassa if she's really suggesting they make Lumina the Baron's second wife, and she just says yeah like it's nothing. Luce is so pumped he shouts her name and pulls her in close, lifting her up in the air while laughing about what a magnificent idea she just had. He admits he thought finding a match for her would be a total pain because of all the drama with Rorona, but this solves everything, claiming the Baron will be easy on her once he realizes she's his daughter, since the guy isn't actually an ogre. Belbarassa looks at him and asks what's going to happen to the family heir if they go through with this. She gets this creepy, dark look on her face and just suggests that they can always have more children. Luce starts thinking about what would happen if Lumina died shortly after getting married, calculating how he could play the part of a sad father who lost both of his daughters. He even figures he could just have more kids once everyone is done feeling sorry for him. But he sits there looking annoyed, thinking about how Lumina's accident yesterday totally wrecked those plans. He taps his finger, frustrated that she's seen as damaged goods now and that the prince bylaid so fast, leaving him wishing that Lumina had just ended up dead like Rorona did instead of being a burden. He's actually mad because he missed his chance to look like a victim, but suddenly, a servant slams the doors open, yelling at the top of his lungs that there's a massive emergency. Luce stands up and asks what all the noise is about while the guy catches his breath, revealing Cezanne has shown up with a whole group of soldiers from the House of Lords. Luce's face goes totally pale as he hears the news. The servant yells that the soldiers aren't just there for a visit. They've actually come to arrest both the count and his wife right now, making things look pretty bad for the family. Meanwhile, over at the Miishi Guild building, Zelio is standing around holding a scroll of fabric while Hangrieve watches him. Hangrieve asks if he's finally made a choice about the Senzu cloth deal, and Zelio admits he's been stressing out over it since it's such a massive decision for his business. He laughs it off though, saying that the amount of money they could make from this is just too big to ignore. Hangreave agrees but reminds him that the huge profit only happens if he can actually find a way to sell all of it. But then he shifts the mood, telling Lord Hungrick that he was honestly pretty surprised by how things turned out. Suddenly, Zelio completely loses his cool and points at the material, yelling that this stuff isn't senzu fabric at all. He explains that trying to move the raw materials for this stuff, or selling it, is strictly against the law and treated as contraband, because it turns out this is actually Lari's fabric, a high-end material that is only ever produced within the Stella Empire. Hangreave is stunned that his secret got out and asks if Zelio actually investigated the fabric. Zelio just holds the scroll and says it was all just a total coincidence, leading into the explanation that some person who saw the cloth actually warned him about what he was holding. It turns out the plan was to take high-end white Lari's fabric with that gold-like shine and dye it brown to sneak it past the authorities, keeping the truth hidden. Hangreave gets a smug look on his face and reminds Zelio that it doesn't matter because the transaction is already finished. Zelio stares off, knowing he's backed into a corner since playing dumb won't save him from being punished for having contraband. He clenches his fist tight and tells Hangreave that he's fully prepared to deal with the consequences of his actions, but then he reveals that he already went out and bought back every single piece of that cloth he sold to his customers earlier. Luckily for him, the buyers had just thrown the rolls into storage instead of using them, making it easy to get them all back, which completely catches Hangreave off guard. He's absolutely floored by this move and can't even find the words to respond as his plan falls apart. Zelio starts to walk away, casually mentioning that he still hasn't given a final answer on whether he's actually taking the deal or not. Zelio points his finger and yells that his answer is a flat no. He's not taking the deal because this contract is basically a disaster waiting to happen for the Merchant Guild and the entire country. He gets up close and asks Hangreave what he's really trying to pull here, especially since he's smuggling out illegal goods and doing a complete hack job on the processing, which means there's no way Hangreave is getting out of this mess without taking a serious hit. Hangreave completely loses it and tells him to shut up, but he doesn't realize that the authorities are already there. A group of armored guards move in and block the exit, leaving Hangreave caught with nowhere to run. He just grinds his teeth and curses as they grab him. The guards start dragging him away, and he screams at Zelio for being a bastard and selling him out. Zelio just waves him off and says that's a pretty mean way to say it. He just told the House of Lords about the illegal deal. Zelio stands there with a dark look on his face, a mean smirk creeping up as he leans in and says he really thought that once that brat was out of the picture, Cezanne would be a total pushover and so easy to manipulate. Cezanne just stands there looking completely floored. He yells out, asking if Zelio is actually talking about the young lady, but Zelio just smirks behind his glasses and tells him he's wrong. He says it's a shame because the girl actually had her uses, and he never really thought she would end up dying in an accident like that. Later on, Cezanne is sitting all by himself on the stone steps of the building looking totally crushed while an official bows to Zelio and thanks him for the tip. He's standing by a carriage and mentions how that merchant had been going around the country selling some really shady stuff. He tells him that based on the report, they're going to make sure the illegal goods are handled with a full criminal penalty. Cezanne stays back and watches as Zelio walks off toward his carriage. Zelio realizes that most of his life savings are going to be wiped out just to pay off all his legal fines. He knows his reputation is trashed too. No one is going to trust a guy caught up in such shady business. But he still tries to convince himself that he at least kept his merchant pride in the end. Rorona just stands there, watching him with that same calm and steady look she always has. Zelio looks completely broken and asks Rorona if this is really the result she wanted. A single tear falls, a sad smile showing that even though things are over, there's some relief there. Later on, Cezanne is walking down a dirt path with his bag packed, heading toward a new start when a guard stops him and says they've been expecting Mr. Shezem to show up. Kaiser greets them with a smile, while the masked man standing there asks who exactly he's supposed to be. A hand reaches out to help the guys up, as Kaiser Bart suggests they keep the conversation going moving into the carriage, where he brings up the evidence papers showing the Count's illegal weapon deals and all the contraband the Countess was buying. Aslan bows his head, saying those documents let him get the House of Lords to finally move in and arrest them. Kaiser looks back on the day he was fired, remembering how much Kaiser Bart actually cared about Rorona's death. Back then, Kaiser Bart was really pushing to find any proof of what the family had done. He was confident that, if his master got her hands on that info, she'd know exactly how to use it. Aslan nods along, mentioning he figured she'd be just as capable as her student. Kaiser can't hide his joy and tells them both that he's the one who should be thanking them for finally getting justice for everything the young lady went through, leaving everyone feeling pretty good. Kaiser stops for a second, feeling like he owes it to the guy to be straight with him, so he asks if it's okay if he gets a bit personal and finds out what exactly his connection was to Lady Rorona. The atmosphere gets pretty quiet as the man smiles and says Kaiser's right to wonder, explaining he's just a guy who Rorona saved back in the day. As he pulls off his mask to reveal his face, he officially introduces himself to the group as Estelle Stella. Kaiser completely loses it when he sees the black hair and red eyes, realizing he's standing right in front of royalty. He starts panicking and bows as low as he can, begging the prince to forgive him for being so casual. Estelle just tells him to relax and cut it out, saying that social status doesn't mean anything in this carriage. Kaiser just stares at him, totally stunned by how down-to-earth a member of the imperial family is being, while Estelle reaches out a hand to him in a gesture of friendship, showing he really means what he's saying. He looks Kaiser right in the eye and says they're basically comrades now, since they're both carrying the same weight in their hearts. Kaiser and Estelle shake on their new deal, officially becoming partners in this whole mess. Estelle says they need to move fast and go get Rorona right now. Kaiser and his buddy just nod, and the carriage pulls up to a huge white building that looks like a cathedral. They jump out, walking up to the massive stone walls where everything feels way too quiet and heavy. The three of them head inside, Kaiser gripping a piece of paper while they follow the path. A priest is waiting by the doors and tells Master Shazam he's been expected, saying Rorona is resting just inside. He tells the group he's going to step out for a little bit to give them some privacy, suggesting they take all the time they need to say their last goodbyes. Kaiser's friend is already losing it and has to cover his mouth, but Kaiser just looks down at Rorona, who's lying still in a coffin surrounded by a mountain of white lilies. Kaiser kneels down right next to the casket, just staring at Rorona resting there. He reaches out and places his hand over hers, feeling how cold she is. Leaning over the edge of the wood, Kaiser softly says Rorona's name as the weight of everything finally hits him and a single tear falls. Behind him, Shazam is completely losing it, sobbing into his hand while calling out to her. Kaiser keeps looking at her, telling Rorona he's sorry and wishing he'd acted way sooner, but as he moves some of the white lilies aside, his eyes suddenly go wide like he's seen a ghost. He calls Shazam over, and the guy sounds confused but moves in close. They both lean over the coffin together, looking at the body with total shock until Kaiser grabs a lock of hair, noting the color is too dark and asking if this is even Rorona. Kaiser holds a lock of the hair in his hands, looking completely floored and saying there's just no way. He keeps repeating no to himself, his eyes wide as he stares down at the body. He remembers Rorona perfectly, thinking about how her real hair was way more translucent than what he's seeing now, so Kaiser calls Lord Estelle over to check it out, and the two of them lean deep into the casket while Kaiser uses his hands to part the hair right at the scalp to get a better look. He points out that the color at the roots doesn't match at all. Asking if this silver hair was just a dye job, Lord Estelle looks like he's seen a ghost, saying it can't be true because that would mean the girl lying there in the middle of all those lilies is a total stranger. He realizes the truth right then and there. The person in the coffin isn't Rorona at all. And the reality is that Rorona never wanted anything fancy, she just wanted to be a normal girl. The sun goes down over the massive church as things take a dark turn. Kaiser and Estelle stand there looking completely floored, staring at the body as Kaiser realizes the silver hair was just dyed over. It's a total shock because the girl lying among the flowers isn't Rorona at all. So Kaiser Bart keeps things moving by mentioning exactly where the body was supposed to be found, and he explains it was out on a highway near the edge of town, right by a small farming village where Kaiser freezes up. Looking totally stressed as he asks about the farming village, Kaiser Bart nods and confirms the name of the place is Stein Village, which triggers something in Kaiser's head as he starts digging through his bag for a specific letter, making Kaiser Bart wonder what's going on while Kaiser explains he got the message right before he showed up, and he hands it over, realizing it's a letter from a sister living right there in Stein Village. Turns out there's an orphanage located in Stein Village, and Rorona was the one spending her time there taking care of all the kids. Back with the guys, Kaiser Bart tells Shazam to just show him what's inside the letter. Shazam agrees right away, and as they read the contents, Estelle and the others look completely floored by what they find. The story jumps back to a few days before Rorona was told her engagement was being called off. She's seen letting out a quiet sigh while brushing her hair, looking pretty lonely as she sits at her vanity mirror in the middle of the night. Rorona tells herself there's no point in feeling down and that she really needs to pull it together, because if she doesn't keep working hard, the whole house of Ryth is going to fall apart in a second. She knows the real reason she's feeling so stressed out. The big graduation ceremony at the academy is only a few days away. Rorona thinks about how she'll have to face the prince to give the farewell speech while he stands there giving her a response with those same cold eyes. She catches herself wondering when things went south and how this huge gap even started. It's not like she ever went looking for any real love from Belvute, mostly because their engagement was something already decided for them. Even if being the future queen felt like a lot to handle, she felt like it was just her fate, and because of that she just went ahead and accepted it. Once the choice was made, she put in the work to make sure she wasn't a burden to anyone, really hoping they could at least manage to be like family. But instead, she has to watch the prince and Lumina acting all close and happy together. Rorona stands there for a second, just trying to process everything, when Lumina suddenly blurts out that she's the one engaged to Lord Belvute now. Rorona snaps back, telling her to stop acting in a way that makes people get the wrong idea, but she tries to explain that Lumina is going to end up marrying someone else anyway, so Lumina cuts her off, telling her big sister to start acting with some actual modesty. She starts yelling that it doesn't matter how cold the prince is to Rorona, she needs to stop making up lies and throwing out these fake accusations. Rorona just stares back, her eyes wide from the shock of the verbal attack, before turning to the prince and reminding him that as the future king, he needs to rethink this. She begs him to think about what's best for Lumina's future and her sister's life going forward. Rorona's eyes sharpen as she watches the two of them, the weight of the situation finally hitting home. She stands there completely alone while the prince and Lumina just walk away together like she doesn't even exist. She thinks back to how much she really trusted them, or at least how much she wanted to believe they were good people, convinced there was just no way the two people closest to her would ever go behind her back and betray her like this. Back in her room, she sets her hairbrush down and admits to herself that trying to talk to her father would be a total waste of time. Because even though he's a kind man, he's definitely not on her side, and saying the wrong thing would just cause a massive, unnecessary scene. With nowhere left to turn, Rorona just hides her face in her hands, totally crushed by everything.